Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Our moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Mr. Watson. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Board of Education May 5th work session. Just a few announcements. When the agenda was published for our regular session meeting, which is next Wednesday, May 12th at 5 p.m., the original location of that meeting was the Andrew Johnson building, but as of yesterday, we have moved that meeting to the main assembly room. So please make a note of that location change, board members. As most of you know, May 2nd through the 9th is Teacher Appreciation Week, and on behalf of the entire Board of Education, I wanted to express our appreciation to our amazing educators and staff this week. Thank you so much for all that you have done for our students this year. The board student representative selection committee finalized their work yesterday with interviews of the top scoring candidates. So we look forward to the introduction of our 2021-2022 student representative that will be made at next week's regular session. The Naming Facilities Committee will meet to consider a nomination to name the gym floor at Austin East Magnet High School in honor of Coach John B. Foster Jr. on Monday, May 10th at 9:30 a.m. That meeting will take place in the Andrew Johnson boardroom. Supporting or opposing opinions and required documentation must be received by the committee at least 5 days prior to the meeting, and that deadline was today. Any questions about that process may be directed to the Board of Education office. Do we have any changes to this work session agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Watson, a second by Ms. Babb. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And I would like to refer to Ms. Babb for our Mission Spotlight today.
Yes, I was asked to speak tonight, and I really tried to think about what's going on, and I do think we have so many wonderful things going on in the school, but I had the opportunity to go to the DEO community meeting I believe last week, and I went to the academic breakout session, and I really wanted to speak to that because it really, to me, hits a lot of the things that we're trying to work on as a district. It talks about improving academics for all students and also decreasing disparities. So I just kind of wanted to go over some of these things that were talked about, and I have to say, Shannon Jackson with Knox County Schools led this meeting, and we had a great discussion in ours. Honestly, we went probably way over the time we were supposed to be. It was a very good discussion, and I think Ms. Jackson, I'm hoping, will come and do a full report out on this to the board and include a lot of those discussion items. But I did want to just highlight some of those goals and some of the things that I think just really speak to where we're trying to go as a district. So goal number 1 is to increase diversity of students in middle school honors and high school advanced academic courses. And they have a lot of strategies behind this, including training middle school teachers in pre-AP readiness, building middle school teams to focus on teaching, organizational skills, agenda keeping, goal setting, note taking, and study skills, really getting kids in middle school ready for the rigor of high school. Support recruitment efforts through equitable grading practices and strategic advising conversations with students, parents, and their caregivers. The goal number 2 is to increase diversity of students receiving industry certifications. And the strategy for that is for counselors and department chairs to lead strategic advising sessions with students in 8th grade to determine appropriate national industry certifications for their areas of interest and aptitude from youth science. And I think we'll hear more about this, but they're really trying to start working with middle schoolers to really help them develop where their interests are and where their skills lie, and really try to help them start forming some direction while in middle school before having to make these tough decisions in high school. And then goal number 3 is to close the achievement gaps in reading and math. And I know we talk about this a lot, but they're doing further teaching training and just several other strategies to go along with it. But I really wanted to speak to this meeting that I went to last week, because I really do think the goals and strategies that we're working on with academics really fit a lot with our strategic plan. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Babb. All right, and I'd like to now refer to Superintendent Thomas for his report today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just a few brief updates for you this evening. And just to reiterate what you've already said, I'd like to begin by pointing out this is Teacher Appreciation Week, and on behalf of the board and our district leaders, I want to say how grateful we are for the tremendous work of our educators this year. As I've said before, and I believe that years from now, we will remember teachers among the unsung heroes of the pandemic. But we definitely should not wait for years before we say thank you to them. Families and students, if you get a chance this week, please take a moment to tell your teacher how they have made a difference in your life and express your gratitude. On a related note, I believe it's important to not only tell teachers they are important, but to show them. With that in mind, I want to point out that last week, the Board of Education approved a 4% increase to the salary schedules for our certified and classified employees in the upcoming fiscal year. I'm also happy to report that Mayor Jacobs, in his budget address yesterday, supported the board's recommendation. So pleased to say that that will be in his budget recommendation to County Commission, and we're very hopeful that County Commission will approve this increase and that it will serve as a tangible sign of our gratitude for the outstanding work our teachers have done this year. Also want to remind students and families that the transfer window to apply to a KCS virtual school for the 21-22 academic year is now open. It opened Monday, I believe. The deadline to submit an application is 4 p.m. on Friday, May 14th, and I'll say that again. The deadline to submit an application is 4 p.m. on Friday, May 14th. So if you're interested in attending a virtual school, please make sure your application is in before that cutoff date. And the applications are available online and also are available at the school. As we have said previously, KCS expects to have 3 virtual schools next year, 1 each for elementary, middle, and high school, and that's pending board approval of creation of these schools, and then also State Department of Education approval. I know that families and students may have questions about how our virtual schools will work, so for more information, please visit www.knoxschools.org/connect to find a frequently asked question document in both English and Spanish. And Tuesday, May 25th, is the last day of classes for students, and it will be a half a day. It's safe to say that our community has never experienced a school year like this one. And I do want to remind everyone of how far we've come since August. Seems like just yesterday in some ways, so that we were talking about opening school. So as we prepared for this school year, there were countless questions, challenges, and concerns that were facing our district. But we all knew that by pulling together as a community, we could overcome those challenges and continue our mission. I want to thank our KCS families and students for their support and commitment to make this year possible. Also want to thank the teachers, teaching assistants, principals, nurses, counselors, nutrition workers, security officers, bus drivers, school secretaries, custodians, and central office staff. Takes a lot of folks to run the school system for their efforts this year, and to say thank you to everyone once again. And I could but not be more proud of the dedication that all of our employees have shown this year. Madam Chair, members of the board, that concludes my report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Any questions or comments from the board? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to discussing the agenda for next week's meeting. Any questions on contracts and items 1 or 2? Okay, 3 or 4? 5 or 6? Or 7? Moving into board policies, any questions on either of the 2 policies? that we have reviewed, and they've also been, this is second reading. Any questions? Okay. Moving into grants, any questions on A or B? Ms. Babb?
Yes, and I don't know, Mr. Thomas, or if this might be Mr. McPherson. There was a lot in here, and I mean, I read it, and I mean, I'm excited about some of the things we're going to do, but I was just thinking it might be good for you to do an overview for us. And this is talking for all those about the ESSER 2.0 fund. This does not even get into the ESSER 3.0 funds.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So this is really the application to the state in the state's account code format. It reflects the initiatives that we discussed with the board a couple of months ago. The main initiatives that we discussed at that time were virtual teaching positions, the one-to-one sustainability, textbooks. Also, there was some building infrastructure there, some virtual classroom and summer transportation. Those are the formative assessments. Those are some that I have note of. So it just reflects those initiatives, but this is just accounting ease, so to speak, when we put this when we send this to the state. So it's really just it's really just the technical GL codes for that.
One question I had, talking about the virtual school, and maybe this is just clarification. So how much of our virtual school for next year is being paid for ESSER funds versus our operating budget?
Well, so for virtual schools, for the most part, all of the teaching positions will be covered with ESSER money.
Okay.
I think also, as I look back at this, about half, maybe not quite half of that is reimbursing this year's budget. And so then this will be for next year's teaching positions, the Quest positions.
Okay, I guess one of the questions I had, because I feel like we're envisioning Quest to be ongoing for the future. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, since we're using ESSER funds for next year, we are probably then the next year going to have to absorb that in the operating budget.
Yeah, that's true, but the expectation though is that this will operate as a separate school, right? And so this year, or for the upcoming year, we've held them harmless, and so schools presumably they lose, the kids transfer into the virtual school. And so normally those positions would go with those students. And so we felt okay about using ESSER money because we held schools harmless this year. So the kids, the positions essentially did not necessarily follow the kids because we didn't know, kind of letting the dust settle. That's why we think we'll be okay picking up these recurring costs in the general purpose because it will just operate much through the staffing formula.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that explanation.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Mr. McPherson. That was a good clarity around the way we're going to pay for the teachers. Is there anything wholly different in this proposal? I didn't think there was than what you recommended
No,
a
sir.
couple months back.
No, it's all of the items that we recommended. No additional ones or none that were lopped off, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions on A? Okay, we'll move to B. Questions on C? Questions on D or E? Questions on F, G, or H? All right, moving to contracts. Any questions on A or B? C or D? Questions on E? Okay, moving to regular agenda items. Any questions on A? B? Okay, and
I
then.
have a question on B, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent Thomas, or whoever may answer, what's the process? Is it first come, first served for the enrollment for virtual school, or is there a process?
There's our transfer process. Russ can probably talk about that a little bit better, but once the application's in, I think they're assigned a random number, and and then be selected randomly, I guess, for just like our regular transfer policy. I know Russ has worked on it more
We'll
closely.
build the student body for the virtual schools the same way through our regular transfer process, which means everybody applies for a transfer, and then when we get ready to make assignments as to who fills the spaces that are available, we do a random number generator, and everybody gets a random number, and then we build the enrollment using those. And there are a number of priorities within the policy that will add weight to particular applications, like if you have a specific course of study requirement, or if you are a teacher's child, or something of that nature, or if you have a sibling issue that we need to deal with. All of those things add weight so that when you go, your number is generated, you get a lower number based on particular weight.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? Okay, and then we'll move to the resolution that Mr. Watson is proposing. So I'll turn to you, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Satterfield is co-sponsoring this, and I think she wanted to make a statement first.
Thank you. And so I just want to address a little bit about this resolution. Contrary to the messaging that the media has been pushing, this is not a direct response to what happened on April 12th. Law enforcement and security relations has been one of the biggest community concerns I've heard, even on my campaign trail, and also as I've been a elected representative. This just happens to be a prime time to bring up this conversation at a greater length. The day that the video evidence was released, there were 12 uniformed security and law enforcement at Austin East the next day. A student shared with me, I've never not wanted to go to school, but seeing so many officers in my school made me very uncomfortable. And so that tells me that while the district did try to make a pivot to a new response, we weren't able to make it happen. But that shows me that we don't know the answers. I don't know the answers, and the staff right now don't know the answers to what will make my community and other communities, this is across the board, feel safe and secure, but also have positive relationships with law enforcement. So I do think that this resolution, well, I know this resolution brings it to the community so that they can give their input and suggestions on how to make it better, because we do need security in our schools, but we need people that know how to work with kids and not people who are trained to work with criminals on the street. Our kids are not criminals. And so it's important.
Excuse me. This will really go for our conversations that we're going to have for the rest of the evening. If we can hold the applause and the comments down, it's very difficult to have a conversation with interruptions. So for the rest of our meeting, if we can do that, that would be helpful. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But yeah, so this resolution is really just to bring it to the community to say what will work, right? We need security in our schools. I'm not doubting that at all, we do. But we also need to understand that right now we don't have the answer, because if your response was 12 uniformed officers the day after that information was released, we're missing something. And we don't know what we're missing. So we need to bring it to the community to say what we're missing. Now, the mechanics of the resolution, kudos to Daniel for creating that and spending the time on the mechanics. And so I thank you, Daniel, for taking this lift as well to help me with this process. But I hope that the board can really support taking the MOA back to the community to really get community input, because we're missing the mark, and I do think this is a perfect opportunity because we are getting new leadership with our security as well.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield, for supporting the resolution. I wanted to give the board a little bit of context about how this resolution came up in my mind. When I was elected last September, was sworn in September, the very first call that I got from central office in terms of a meeting was Chief Paducas. He was very welcoming. He called me and said, "Hey, Mr. Watson, I want to get the chance to meet you. I want to share with you some about what we're doing." And I think the next week is when we first met. And that was the first time that I really, even as a parent of Knox County school kids, that I really began to understand how we do safety and security in our schools. And I'm ashamed to admit that, but that's the truth. And I didn't realize at that point that we had 105 officers that are SSOs. I didn't realize that we also commingled them with KPD officers and KCSO officers in certain schools. And so what I did for the next 3 or 4 months is I started digging into the history of how we got to where we are, tried to understand some of the reasons and the mechanics behind that. And one of the things that I learned in that process is, and it's reflected in the resolution, is that until Columbine in 1999, we didn't have any KPD or KCSO officers in our schools. And that was a response that was made at that time. We didn't actually have an operating agreement with KPD and KCSO for the next 10 years until 2009. And then the next signed board MOA that we had with law enforcement was actually done in 2019, and some of you all who are on the board now helped with that. But the thing that I also learned from Gus and many others is that neither one of those processes were very community informed. They didn't have an opportunity for the community to really weigh in. And also with Chief Paducas retiring in June, I think this is the right time to engage the community, because the reality is we steward the community's resources for the community's kids. That's what we're in charge to oversee, and I think the community needs to be able to speak into that. So my values, my personal values, are really centered in collaboration and community, and that's been all throughout my work and all throughout my career. And one of the things that I fundamentally believe is that we can always get to a better result when we engage the community in a healthy way. And so the intent of this resolution is not to suggest any specific changes to the MOA. And I do want to speak to the letter that I know has been going around on social media from KCEC. That letter is not my letter. I didn't draft that letter. I didn't have anything to do with that letter. And a lot of people have confused this resolution with that letter. And in that letter, it asked for, I think it asked for officers to be immediately removed from schools. I don't want to debate that letter tonight. That's not what this is about. I want us as a board to be able to reflect on the resolution at hand. And so the resolution is simply to say, the intent of it is to outline a very specific public community process over a defined period of time to seek any type of recommendations from the community relative to the MOA. The framework, if you hadn't had a chance to read it yet, is that we would have a subcommittee of the board, 3 members, and then also Superintendent Thomas or a designee that would then create a task force that would have representatives from the student body, from parents, from teachers, from administrators, to civil rights organizations, to other community stakeholder groups, mental health professionals, as well as local law enforcement. We would have at least 3 community gatherings. These gatherings would not be opportunities for KCS to say, here's how we do school security. It would be an opportunity for it to be a highly facilitated process where the community is able to lift up its concerns, its issues, its ideas relative to school safety and security. And then there's a very specific timeline. I've also, I know this would take secondary board action, but in the resolution, I also am asking for funding. This funding would be specifically used to engage outside facilitators in those community gatherings, because I think transparency is real key, and whoever does that facilitation, it needs to be clear that they don't have an agenda in that facilitation. And then we would also engage subject matter experts, people who have studied agreements between public education and local law enforcement in other parts of the country, as well as have some funding to engage subject matter experts and evidence-based practices around school safety and security. So this is it's a very specific process, but I think we owe it to the community to hold ourselves accountable to a process. And what I don't want to do is just say, let's go rework the MOA and then come out 4, 5, 6 months or a year later and say, here's what we got. I think we need to hold ourselves to a different standard. So in the intent and the values that I have around collaboration and community, this was built with collaboration and community. So I engage students, parents, teachers, and administrators in District 3. All the administrators I have 6 administrators in my district. 4 of the 6 that got back with me are supportive of the resolution. I engage civil rights leaders, community groups, members, leaders of other school districts. I talk to central office, to Superintendent Bob, to Russ, to Chief Paducas. Our law department, I also talk to Mayor Kincannon and through her Chief Thomas. There's not anybody on that list that was not supportive. I can't speak, Russ actually didn't tell me if he was or was not. I didn't actually ask him, but Chief Paducas has been supportive since I talked about with him with this about 5 months ago. Superintendent Thomas has said he's supportive of this resolution. The mayor has said she is supportive of this resolution. Chief Thomas is supportive of this resolution. And if the board has not had a chance to see the letter that the mayor sent at 3:45 today, I believe, this was not a letter that I asked her to send. This is something that she did on her own. But in that letter, she states how much she appreciates the Board of Education and our role in providing a safe, nurturing environment. She reflects on the growth of our own SSO department over the years. And she talks about wanting that the police department in the city of Knoxville looks forward to participating in discussions with all stakeholders as we envision the best ways to provide safe and appropriate learning environments for all students and staff moving forward. And then she also says that as of June 12th, KPD in the city of Knoxville will be withdrawing from the current MOA. And she does make it clear that the intent of that is not to say KPD is not willing to work with Knox County schools in the future, but is to say by withdrawing from the current MOA, then we need to negotiate a new MOA. So this resolution simply lines out a process to do that work, and obviously we would have to engage other stakeholder groups like KCSO and others as well. So, Superintendent, I would like to ask for you just to take a brief moment and reflect some on our conversations over the last few months. Again, I want to highlight the fact that this is something that did not just come out of thin air, and then also, Superintendent, if you can speak to if you support this resolution or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. And yes, let me say that we have had ongoing conversations that actually started several months ago. It was, I think, before any of the incidents that have happened. So you have expressed that to me, and I said at that time, yes, I could support opening up the memorandum of agreement because, again, we have, I think the last one signed off on Mayor Rogero. So we have a different mayor, obviously, today. And I'm not sure, I know we have some new board members as well that weren't involved in the process prior to. So yeah, it did make sense to go back and look at the MOA. And time has passed since the last one, so it seemed to make sense too to gather around the table and look at what we have done, and are there any improvements that could be made. So those were all things that we talked about, and again, provided that everybody is agreeable to getting around the table and talking through this. And if we can improve, I mean, the goal is to always improve what we're doing and do it better. So that was the reason I could support the MOU or the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement. And in no way have I indicated, I mean, I know law enforcement provides a very vital role in our school. Our school security officers do a great job. Our school security officers are able to do things maybe law enforcement's not able to do, and law enforcement's able to do some things that school security officers can't do. And the primary goal for me, and I've said it and I'll continue to say it, is the safety of our staff and students, and anything and everything that we can do to try to provide the safest environment in which to go to school and for our staff to teach is what I want to do. And I think if you look at the past years, the services the sheriff has provided have helped us to do that, and then also KPD, as well. So I just wanted to say that I do support the law enforcement in our schools with our school security officers. However, if the process can be improved upon, then that's what we need to do. And I know from a resource, I'm not sure what KPD what their resources are in total, but I know KCSO, the budget's like over $3.5 million what they provide, to our school system in terms of their resources. So, if we didn't have those the KPD or KCSO, again, they've helped us in situations where maybe we have to move our school security officers to other schools, maybe to do like random searches and things of that nature, and having that law enforcement presence there has helped us to do that because we're not staffed up to the point where we could. So probably if, in the absence of having services provided for us or to us by law enforcement, we would have to staff up. I think, I don't know, Russ, in terms of the number of positions, but we would have to try to maybe staff up by how many positions, I guess, if we didn't have the services of law enforcement to help us.
I think the direct correlation between positions that law enforcement currently provides to us in support and what we have is somewhere around 45 or 50. We would probably need more positions than that because when law enforcement comes to us, they come to us with the full support of their agency behind them, and we're able to work on a daily basis between our folks and law enforcement to make sure that we do have an armed uniform individual on every campus. So, and this has been really difficult this year too with COVID and, you know, the issues with not just illness, but with quarantines and having to work through that. And we could not have gotten through this year without the support of the Knox County Sheriff's Office and Knox County Police Department on a daily basis with our people as we tried to make sure that all those places are covered.
Yeah, and thank you, Russ. And let me say, in reading this resolution, I didn't read into that we didn't want law enforcement. So in my mind, that wasn't the intent, you know, of the resolution. But the intent was to look at what we're doing, get community input, transparency, and to do what we're doing better if there's a way to do it better. So, thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. And again, I appreciate the dialogue, Russ and Superintendent, around what it might take for us to staff our own security office. Again, I don't want the board to confuse what's on the table in this resolution. It's not, at this point, this resolution is just saying, let's have a process where we engage the community, because I'm 100% confident in this statement that I'm about to make, and that is 100% of the people in this room right now want our kids to be safe in schools. I have no doubt about that statement. The difference is, for each of us in this room, we interpret a little bit differently what safety looks like. For my kid, for your kid, for our kids. And unless we're willing to get at the table and say, what does safety look like for your kids? Help me understand that. Then we're not going to move very far. And this book title is actually unfortunate. It's not my book, but there's a great book called Collaborating with the Enemy. And the whole title and the whole book is centered on this idea that if you really want to move a community forward, you have to get at the table with other people who don't see eye to eye to you. You can't do anything meaningful unless you're willing to do that. And I think that's been reflective in our discussions over the last few months, even around masking. We've had lots of conversations with people, even in this board, who doesn't completely agree, and hopefully we'll get to a good solution this coming week. But I think that's also true when it comes to school safety and security, is we have to be willing to sit at the table with people we may not think we even see eye to eye to. And my guess is when we start really talking about our shared values, we will see that we have way more in common than what we don't. I mean, I'm also almost 100% positive of that. And so that's the only purpose in this resolution, is to say, let's get some people around together that, yes, at sometimes may yell at one another, but let's do it for our kids, right? Because they're worth it. And at the end of the day, that's what this resolution is about. So.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Babb? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Christie, were you first?
Okay. Well, I guess I have a couple of things. First off, I got this resolution, and to me, this isn't a resolution. To me, and I actually looked up resolution, and one of the definitions is a resolution is used to express a body's approval or disapproval of something. And that's kind of when we've had resolutions come before us. It's like we're sending a resolution to our state legislature to show support. This is a detailed plan of how we are supposed to go forward. And to me, that is not what a resolution is. And I just even think about the naming committee that we have formed. We had much more discussion about how that would take place and go forward. And I feel like this and I totally agree. We need to have discussions. We all want our kids to be safe, and I completely agree with that. But we've had a lot of things go on in our community that have raised the blood pressure of people. We've just gotten a letter that sort of brought out one thing that then confused things with this resolution. We just got a letter from the mayor today, which, to be honest, the way her dates are, we would have no police force in our schools starting with the school year. Because the way this is outlined, we wouldn't even have recommendations until September 29th.
Excuse me, we cannot hear our speaker, okay?
Excuse me while I try to speak.
Thank you.
I will say that I have told my principals, because I'm not in the schools, and I do not know how they work every day. I mean, I've been a very active parent, I've had kids in them, but I am not trying to run our schools. And I spoke to every single one of my principals, and every single one of them said they could not do their job without law enforcement. And I know this resolution is not trying to say this, but even your dates alone, we are now going to end up without law enforcement, which I know some people would applaud, but please don't, for a period, because we're not even getting to suggestions until end of September. And so I do want conversations. I think there's a lot to talk about, and I do think we all want safety. But I don't like the way this was done, to be honest with you. I mean, I feel like it was very much this is the plan, and and I know this is our only way to discuss it, but that's where I'm kind of coming from, and I'm having problems with it. And I'll be honest, I 100%, I mean, not 100%, I got a lot of emails today, and I'm sure other people will email me the other side of it, but I heard from my principals, I heard from teachers, I heard from parents, and I heard from kids, and the majority, not every single one of them, want the law enforcement in our schools. They support it. Now, I know that's not everybody. I do. I completely understand there are two sides to everything. But there is not just one side on this issue. And I do agree, discussions are need to go on, and I think we always need to be continuing improvement, and I think we need to continue communication. I just don't know that I like the format of this resolution, I'll be honest with you.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Can we hear from Ms. Christie? Ms. Christie?
Yeah, just a couple of, I guess, a question, and I don't know, Mr. Thomas or Mr. Oakes. A lot of their security measures that are in place, did they not come from a community meeting that we had after the events at Sandy Hook? Wasn't there a community meeting at Amherst, I believe, that with the former superintendent, former sheriff, and Chief Roush?
We've had a number of meetings and forums over the years that have evolved. I know that after incidents we've had in the past, we've brought in outside entities to work with us and to work through and look at our practices and procedures. I think the force that we have right now came out of Dr. McIntyre's concern after the Sandy Hook incident that we do everything that we can in order to prevent having a similar type incident in Knox County, and he really felt that it was necessary to expand our security force, and that's where we started down this road.
And our school security officers, who issues their bond cards? Is that through the sheriff's department? Is that?
The Knox County Sheriff's Office bonds all of our officers, and they review all of our officers' candidates to make sure they are acceptable and bondable to them. And then I think the term is become a special deputy.
So we heavily rely on them for our employees, our school security officers.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I know this isn't to debate the letter that KCEC sent out, but unfortunately that now is a part of this discussion, and it seems to have confused a lot of parents, a lot of grandparents, a lot of teachers, a lot of administrators, and a lot of our officers. I mean, I've heard a lot from our school security officers who we struggled to keep over the summer that they no longer are feeling supported. And I can understand I mean, I appreciate the resolution. I definitely would welcome the superintendent and the security chief revisiting the MOA with our outside law enforcement agencies. I do have some concerns, like Ms. Babb, about how this is written. My preference would be for that to happen and to have community forums district-wide where we could hear from all districts about what their needs are, because obviously, as others have mentioned, you know, safety and what they feel that what they want for their kids is very different from one school to the next.
Thank you, Ms. Christie. If we can go to Ms. Bounds first, Mr. Watson, before we come back to you, and then to Ms. Owen, and then we'll come back to Mr. Watson.
Thank you, and I know all the board received this email today, but I just wanted to respond because you asked the question, Ms. Christie, if there were meetings, public meetings before, and since some of the board members are new, this particular board member that was here at that time said the Sandy Hook school shooting occurred in December 2012. Shortly thereafter, Superintendent McIntyre held several town hall meetings, and they were very heavily attended. Overwhelmingly, there was passionate support for schools to have an armed officer on the premises, as well as improved security measures, and a significant budget investment was made. So I just wanted to answer that question from someone that was here at the time that knew that there were town hall meetings where we got public input.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those meetings that took place in 2012, I believe those were more administrative. And a couple of people have talked about when this board worked on this MOU before. And I want to point out that when we were actually brought this MOU in 2019, we asked for community input and we asked to put it off. And we were told that it was urgent and needed to be voted on quickly, and that nothing in here could be changed unless we started another process. We were told a lot of things, but we were not given input into the MOA. So I think it's really important for everyone here to understand that this board did not work on this MOA. This board just approved this MOA in 2019. Please hold the applause.
Thank you. Mr. Watson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Babb, I appreciate your comments about the structure of the resolution. When I talked to Gary with the Law Department, asking, how can, what's the right structure for this? The best we could come up with was a resolution. It's obviously not a policy, and so that's the reason why it's the form of the resolution. I do know at least one other resolution that had action associated with it, and that was the Juneteenth resolution that was passed last year. The action that was going to be taken out of that was we were going to adjust the calendar moving forward. So I know there's a lot more specific action in this, but it's not that resolution never leads to action. So I do appreciate that comment, though. Also, I can't control what the mayor did in her letter. These dates were thought out before she ever sent that letter. And regardless of whether or not we approve this resolution or not, she's withdrawing her KPD officers as of June 12th. So we have to have a new MOA if we want to continue to engage. And we can choose to do it a lot of different ways. I know Ms. Christie's recommending another way to do that. I do think it's important for the board to be engaged throughout whatever that process is. I also think it's important for the community to be engaged. Again, I think sometimes we throw around words like transparency and community engagement and things like that, and just like the word safety, they mean very different things to different people. And sometimes we have community meetings. I'm not saying of this board, I'm just saying in general, we have community meetings, and oftentimes the people who set up the meeting, that's an opportunity for them to share their agenda, and that's what happens, like they just report out. And what my attempt to do in this resolution is to say, let's have a dialogue that's facilitated where we can elevate those issues and concerns. Also, too, I want to point out that after Sandy Hook, there actually was another MOA that was signed. It's not referenced in this resolution, and the reason it's not is because the board did not sign it. It was not brought to the board. It was something that Jim McIntyre did on his own. And so again, although there was some community meetings that were a part of that, that was action that the superintendent at that time took. I'm sorry?
I think that was in 2010. I think that may have been before Sandy Hook.
Okay, so I'm only going from what I've been told, and I've asked Terry to look up stuff for me and lots of other people, but, so regardless, that MOA in the middle was not signed by the board. It was signed just by the superintendent and the other parties. And so my point in saying that is I've never met Jim personally. This is not a comment about Jim McIntyre, but I don't know his reasons for doing that. But not bringing it to the board, and then to me, I think this board needs to be able to speak into that. And in the history, if you track safety and security and the role of officers in our schools, there was 2 inciting events. There was Columbine and there was Sandy Hook. I did not write this resolution because of what happened with Anthony. I started this resolution many months ago. But I think some in our community would say there has been another inciting event where it makes sense to relook at this MOA. And again, the point of this, and I know we've already started discussing it because of the KCEC letter, the point of this resolution is not, do we need officers or do we not? The point is, and especially because of the mayor's actions today, we need to look at the agreement for it. And also, I want to say this too. Everybody knows that we're under open meeting laws and acts and things like that. And so, the hard part in that is I haven't gotten to get together with each one of you individually and say, hey, tell me what you think. How would you do this process, right? So, like, this is the forum. This is the way we get to do it. I'm fine with hearing recommendations and thoughts and ideas about how we might adjust or shift this in ways that people might be supportive of it. And I'll certainly go back to the drawing board. And, obviously we can get some of those thoughts tonight, but even if you all, I think, can send those through Terry or something too. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, I agree as well with Daniel. I'm not committed to the mechanics of the resolution, but I am committed to bringing it to the community and doing something different, especially since we're about to get a new head of security. And this is the perfect opportunity to say, this is what it looks like for Knox County schools. This is what it looks like for Knoxville community to have security in our schools. And so I support whatever's within line, suggestions within the resolution that may be, but because I'm not committed to that aspect, but I am committed to bringing it to the community and getting input.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Ms. Babb, and then we'll go to Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, and this is just real quick, but I think what I would prefer, rather than what's going forward here, because I'm all for the conversations, I'm for community input and talking about it, but what I think has happened is, what has happened this week between this coming out, the letter we got, what we just got from the mayor, it's kind of turned the conversation into something we did not mean for the conversation to be. What I would like to see is maybe the board have a meeting and whoever chooses to come, do something like our policy review, where we really sit down, press is welcome to come, but it's much more of a dialogue between us on really how do we do it and talking about it. I think this was hard when it was kind of already so laid out. And I appreciate the time. This is not appreciating the time that Mr. Watson has put into this because I feel like he has, and I know he feels passionately about this. But I would like a little bit more of a discussion about kind of the process that I think the resolution doesn't really do. And I think what's happened this week has kind of elevated some stuff in a way that we didn't mean for this conversation to go.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. I think that's a very good suggestion. Mr. McMillan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for being late. I may have missed a little of the conversation there initially, but if I do remember when we formed our group, I'm not talking about the people that work at KPD or the ones that work at the Sheriff's Department, but but our group. And, you know, we had a couple of community meetings, as best I recall. I don't recall anybody expressing opposition to it. It was quite the contrary. Everybody was in favor of it. Now, whether it was a reaction, even though it happened, you know, a long ways from here, it was like, this could happen in our town. And we're gonna do something, we're gonna do something now about it. And we spent millions of dollars as a result of that, training people. Now, having said that, everybody wants safety, and they want to feel like the kids are secure in their schools, and we also want community involvement. What I think would be a better proposal is to kind of pick up on what Ms. Christie said here or mentioned. Why do we not have some community meetings and the board go to those and hear what the community has to say? And then after that, we could formulate based on what we were hearing there. I think that would be a much better approach. You know, things may be different. One place, the feelings may be much different than they are in another community. Now, obviously, we can't have one in every community, but we could have enough to where we could get a general idea. Now, of course, I represent the 8th District, and I've already heard from several people there today, and they want, and I want, as a representative of the 8th District, I want law enforcement in my schools. Now, there's some places may not want that, but I believe that that's the majority feeling in our area. I believe that schools are much better off with trained officers. So as Russ referenced to, you know, if we had to replace the actual people that are members of KPD and Knox County Sheriff's Department, we probably would have to have more individuals, because, as he said, when they're there, they bring whatever agency they represent. And I think that's a good thing. Now, in certain instances, it may be bad. It may turn out to be bad. You know, obviously, things don't turn out quite like we plan them sometimes with all of our, we can meet, talk and talk and talk, and that doesn't mean that we resolve the problem. But I do think that that would be a much better approach, that the board would act as a, for lack of a better term, canvassing agent to find out what the communities desired, where they would feel safe, at what level, and then we would move from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. I think we're going to go to Ms. Henderson next. There's a lot of lights on, but I think Ms. Henderson hasn't had a chance to speak, so let's go to her.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Board. I first want to say I appreciate and thank all the officers in all of our schools. They deserve our respect and praise, and as a mother of 2 children, that's my #1 priority when I drop my kids off at school, is that they're safe. I know that the mayor's letter is not part of Mr. Watson's resolution, but it did come at the same time of this meeting, and I want to say that I really am saddened at this decision that she's made. I'm not willing to put our children's lives at risk for a theory that says we don't need officers in our schools.
Excuse me.
And second, I would like to say, along with...
Excuse me. Please, we cannot hear the speaker. You can sign up to speak at public forum next time if you'd like.
Along with Ms. Christie and Ms. Babb's suggestions of, revisiting this as a board decision with community input. Everybody knows that I'm big on community and involving the community, but I think it's a board decision. We were all elected to do this job, and it's our decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Okay, I think we'll go to Mr. Watson, or Ms. Satterfield, were you next? Okay, go right ahead.
Yes, I would just, so when I had the opportunity to hang out with the class of, Austin East class of 2022 last week, and a lot of them were saying they want, that they're okay with their securities, they just want to have a meeting. They gave ideas such as like a meet and greet at the beginning to say, hey, this is what we expect of our officers and this is how we operate. So letting them know that when you come into this particular community, this is how we expect you keep our school safe, but also protect us as well as individuals. And so that was an idea that I was like, oh, well, that's a great idea. And so this resolution, or this conversation that we have, whatever format that we move to, is just gonna highlight that different communities have different relationships with law enforcement. And if that means that as a Knox County school, we operate differently in some communities when it comes to security, then that's what we need to do. But we don't know what that is right now because we haven't heard voices from various communities. And so I want to keep that in the forefront that, we even talked about, does security at some schools look like plain clothes security versus suited up in a uniform? Because seeing a uniform like that does have a triggering response to certain communities, specifically Black and brown communities. And so can Knox County schools get to a position where for communities that want the law enforcement in full out uniforms, they can have that, but for communities that don't, we can have that too. The only way we can have that discussion is creating a new MOA. So thank you.
Ms. Satterfield. Mr. Watson?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Trying to track the different things that I'm hearing so I can make sure I'm responding correctly. So, Mr. McMillan and Ms. Henderson, I think what you all described is what I'm trying to do in the resolution. The resolution says the Board of Education would have an ad hoc committee that would report back to the board as a whole after basically having community meetings. And so I think we're in agreement with that should happen. So if you all can provide some more specificity about what the difference is there, that would be great. But the other thing that did not get in the red line version that's actually currently online publicly, and this was just a communication error with me, is under the line that says about the task force, bullet point 3, under the core of the resolution, it currently says that includes a representative from the student body. Actually, I changed that to plural. It would say that includes representatives from all these different groups, student bodies, parents, teachers, and all that. Because I agree. I think that this is a county-wide conversation. I don't think this is about one particular community, one particular zip code, one particular school. And so, and also, I said at a minimum, 3 community gatherings. And if we want to do more than that, I'm completely game for that. I would be totally open for that. So I guess what I'm hearing, and I mean this with all due respect, is the last few comments. I think Ms. Babb was very clear in about thinking that saying this needs to go to central office. Basically, I think is what Ms. Babb is saying. The rest of the comments, I'm not heard what needs to shift in this to make it be something that you would approve of, because this is the board making the decision after getting recommendations from the community in a specific process. So.
Okay, I'm not sure I heard I'm not sure what he's referring to about the central office. But give it.
Yeah, Ms. Babb, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were talking about how detailed this is in terms of process, and I thought you were saying you wanted to give that back to Bob and whoever.
No, I actually wanted us to kind of meet in a format where we could really kind of hash
Okay.
it out as a board,
Yeah,
more
so
like a policy review meeting.
That's what I mean. I was trying to track all the comments. So yes,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I really would like us to have more, I just feel like this format and with what has happened this week, it's kind of
Right.
gotten this elevated on a different level than you even intended it to
Sure.
be. And I would love to kind of have a policy review type meeting where we come together, whichever board members choose to, it's not a voting meeting, but we can
Right.
really talk about, like, how do we think it should be
Yeah.
structured going forward? And once again, not a closed meeting.
I agree with that, and,
Yeah.
and the other thing that I think should happen out of that, though, if we go that approach, I really, and whether it's a resolution or whatever we want to call it, it needs to come back to the public where we say, this is the process we're holding ourselves to. Because that's the problem in conversations with transparency in elected bodies, is we say we're going to do something a certain way, and then the community wakes up 5, 6, 7 months later, and they're like, oh, like, that's not what we heard, or that's not what was communicated. So the whole purpose in the resolution was to basically say to the community, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to a process. And again, I'm not married to this process, but I think whatever process we line out as the board, I think that needs to be clearly communicated to the community that this is the way we intend to approach this and hold ourselves to it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I would agree that I don't like the idea of doing this through a resolution. And I'm curious, what were, I'm assuming you've talked to several entities. If you have spoken with the district attorney's office, and if you've spoken with the sheriff's office, and if they're agreeable to this timetable. Because this is a very tight, timetable, so are they agreeable to that?
So the only bodies that the only governmental bodies, I mentioned a whole list of other groups earlier, that I spoke to about this specific language was the mayor's office, Mayor Concanon, and through her to the KPD's office. I do know that superintendent had a conversation with the sheriff's office about it. I do not have contacts with all those entities, but I'm certainly willing to have that conversation. But I also think too that so in any MOU, any MOA, there's a lead organization, and in this MOA, the way it's written and it's correct is we are the lead organization. We as Knox County Schools are entrusted with overseeing the safety and security. I'm not saying that we don't engage others, and I understand what you're asking about the timetable. And of course, the other entities would have to agree to a timetable, without a doubt.
Well, I would think it would be important to know if they are agreeable to said timetable before we agree, or before we have a resolution. We've already established how dependent we are on the Knox County
Sure,
Sheriff's
yeah.
Department.
Yeah,
So-
and I'm willing to have those follow-up conversations about whatever timetable that we want to have.
Okay, I'm very concerned that you haven't had those conversations and that we're discussing a timetable that they haven't been included in.
Yep.
So, okay, thank you.
So, Madam Chair, out of respect, there's been many things on this board since I've sat on it that have not been completely vetted with every single entity that needs to be talked to. And out of fairness, I do think I did a lot to prepare for this. There's certainly other people that we need to talk to, and like I said, I'm willing to have those conversations.
Thank you. Okay, I think Ms. Owen was next. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Those people who have objections to the timeline, I'm wondering if it would be acceptable to allow the subcommittee to hash out the timeline. And what I'm thinking, while Mr. McMillan was speaking, I felt like I had heard this conversation before, and I think it's because this is the same conversation we had in 2019 when we asked for public meetings and couldn't get that to happen. So if we don't like a resolution, what format would be better? And if the timeline isn't acceptable, is it acceptable for the subcommittee to change that timeline as they go? And if we need to have a meeting of us at some point, can that happen before next week?
Okay, and now, thank you, Ms. Owen. I think Ms. Christie was next, and then Ms. Bounds, and then Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, I like the idea Ms. Babb had of discussing it like in a policy review type format. I'm really not a fan of the subcommittee of the board because I think this is a conversation that all board members need to be engaged in, because it does affect all their districts and people do feel differently. I know I've gotten a lot of emails and phone calls and texts from people in my district, and, you know, they feel that this is, discussion has somehow turned into an anti-law enforcement discussion, which is really unfortunate. So I am not a fan of the subcommittee, and I'm really not a fan of a handpicked task force either. I kind of regret doing that for the reopening plan, not because I regret the person I chose. I just regretted putting that person in that position, and I feel like it would have been better if we had just discussed that as a board. So that would be what I would recommend. I mean, I do think we need to have the discussion in that format, and I think all board members need to be engaged, and I think it needs to be a community-wide discussion. And even as to what Ms. Satterfield said, it might be that we have to do different things at different schools, which, you know, that's how we will get that input. But I do think we all need to be engaged, so I'm not really a fan of the subcommittees or the task force.
Thank you, Ms. Christie. Ms. Bounds?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just say, this is why the Sunshine Law can prevent good governance, because I've heard some great thoughts tonight, which is why, and Ms. Christie, I wish I'd gone before you because you stole most of my stuff. But this is why I prefer to do a policy review format where we can have a discussion as a board and get consensus on how we want to move forward with this. I love Ms. Satterfield's out-of-the-box thinking about meet and greets. I know, in her community, and I like the point that she made, because I think it's very important to realize that one size does not fit all in a district of our size with 90 schools. And so each community is different, and therefore I respectfully disagree with my colleague over here, Mr. McMillan, that I would like to see, and I don't think it's too much to ask, a meeting in each district, a well-publicized meeting. But having been on this board for 7 years, and some of it's just learned by trial and error, I am not a fan of the subcommittee. I'm not a fan of the task force and how that works. And so I would love to, or I'm asking you, Ms. Horn, if you will set aside and get a time when we can meet in a policy review format and work out some of these details going forward. I think that's the best way forward with this. So anyway,
Thank you, Ms. Bounds.
so
It
if you'll
sounds-
take care of that with you and the superintendent.
Okay, we can definitely do that. It sounds like there's a lot of consensus in that. Mr. McMillan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Watson, would you accept 3 meetings wherever where the communities could be engaged? I mean, would that be enough for you rather than going every district?
So, yeah, in the resolution, I suggest a minimum of 3 meetings. So certainly, a minimum of 3 would suffice for me.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to doing one in every
What
district.
about, now, and what about this? What about if we had 3 community meetings to find out what the wishes of, or it could be more than that if you wish, but since you had mentioned something about 3, I don't think it has to be one in every district, but that's my opinion. And then the board would, collectively attend these if they so desired. They're not required to, but they could come to everyone that's held. And then they would, at that point, after that had been done, come back together And the board as a whole, I don't like subcommittees either, or people being appointed. The board as a whole act as a policy review to establish what we want or what we see. What part of that can you not agree with?
Yeah, Mr. McMillan, there's, I'd have to process more about it, but I mean, I'm open to all those ideas.
Well, it would take some.
As I said, this was my attempt at outlining a process that frankly, I knew there would be a lot of discussion about. I mean, I didn't come into this meeting blind thinking everybody was going to love this process as designed, but it was a way to start that conversation and that discussion. And out of respect for the board, frankly, is the reason why I suggested an ad hoc school and safety and security subcommittee, mainly because if this is done with any kind of expediency, which I think, again, I think the mayor's letter today probably forces us to do it even faster than I was thinking we would do it. It's going to be a lot of work. And so, I mean, that was the reason to suggest an ad hoc committee is for those who wanted to serve on that, you know, they would be able to get in and dig into that higher level of work. Obviously, that subcommittee would not make any decisions outside of the board, but I'm certainly open to any and all of the board being a part of the process. I think that would be fantastic, and I think that sends a good message to our community that each individual board member would want to serve in this way to talk about safety and security. So that was not an attempt to exclude people. That was an attempt to say, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting here, and I don't want to speak for everybody in terms of their ability to do that in that period of time. But to me, the more the better, and that, again, was another intent of the way I drafted the resolution, which was also the attempt at the task forces to say, hey, let's make sure that we get all the different stakeholder groups to the table. Obviously, they can come and be a part of a facilitated community gathering. And I do think that's an important part of this. And I know we're kind of getting into the place where I know Ms. Babb and Ms. Horn want to go in terms of having this conversation in a policy review, and I'm open to doing that. But since you asked, Mr. McMillan, that's the reason why I said some of those things, but I'm certainly open to all these ideas. So.
Well, eventually, even if we were to go the route that I just described, I think at some point after the policy review, the board would have to vote on some kind of motion, I'm assuming, just as we do with things that go through policy review. But you spend a lot of time compiling all this, and we all want as many people to participate with opinions as possible. But sometimes, you know, you can get, for whatever reason, you don't get the true opinions that you're looking for. Now, in your district, I know that you know your district. You know what generally, you've talked to a lot of people over there. You may run into some new ideas, and it's the same with most of us. Generally speaking, we know what level and what the expectations of security and law enforcement is in our particular district. That's why I think that it would be better to just do something along these lines. And, you know, if necessary, if it requires a motion in order to do that, before next week, why, I can get with the law director and, you know, he can do the legal aspects of it where at least we'd have something to talk about. That everybody might not agree with it, but at least it would be a starting point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Yeah, I agree. I do think we all generally know what our different communities expect in terms of safety and security. And from what I've heard from people in administration and others who have helped form the current MOA, that's true in this current MOA. This current MOA is fairly general. And so I think whenever you have more than one law enforcement agency occupying the same space, so our SSOs as basically special deputies that are bonded and armed, our KPD officers and our KCSO officers, whenever you have more than one agency occupying the same space, it demands more specificity, because those different groups, those different individuals answer to different entities. And so again, I think that's why it's important to involve both subject matter experts, evidence-based people who are skilled in evidence-based practices around safety and security, and community in these conversations, because again, we know that, I think this is to your point, Mr. McMillan, is that the community can have lots of great ideas that cannot necessarily be implemented. I mean, we know that. They don't understand all the levers and how things get pulled and all that kind of stuff. But they can help inform the direction and help us get to the specificity that I think we really need for all of our kids. So again, I appreciate the conversation that we're having as a board, and I appreciate the ideas that have been lifted up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
If I could just make a comment. I agree with what you're saying, understand that. But I think in most communities, or most schools, I should say, the role of the person that's there from the sheriff's department or from KPD and our officers, it's not an adversarial role. I think the principal, I would hope, kind of when school starts, gets together and, talk about what the responsibilities will be of each one of them, and, that way nobody steps on anybody's toes. And I think that would be a logical way to approach it. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan and Mr. Watson. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the hesitance to form a committee on this issue, and I'm wondering if it would be acceptable to have a committee of 2 or 3 just to organize and drive the meetings that all of us could attend and give input in. Would that make any difference in having a committee if they were just doing the?
Do you mean the community meetings?
No, I'm thinking
okay.
Where it's listed as a committee in here, if that committee was just to do the boots on the ground, organizing, getting the meetings together and that kind of thing. Not even to facilitate?
Okay. It doesn't look like that's, I think it sounds like, from what I'm hearing as consensus from the board, that that what the majority of the board sounds like they're comfortable with would be the board doing a work session, like a more casual kind of policy review type work session, and then after that do community meetings. Is that correct, in the correct order? Does anybody have thoughts on that, Ms. Babb?
Personally, this is my suggestion, is I would like us to have a workshop meeting very soon. And I have to say, I don't like this resolution, Mr. Watson, but I do appreciate you bringing this topic up. And this is a topic that weighs on all of us right now. I mean, I do think we need to talk about it. I think it's a good conversation. I just personally don't like the format. But what I would like is for us to come together, have a discussion where we as a group kind of come up with the plan to go forward. Whether it's 3 meetings like Mr. McMillan wants, whether it's a meeting in every district like Ms. Bounds wants, but let's all kind of just hash it out, discuss it in a way that's not so pressing a button and having to be called on, and we can really kind of talk about it. It will be sunshine, so, But
Yeah,
Sometimes I do think these kind of meetings, it would be great if we could just, the 9 of us get in a room and just figure it out, but that's not the way this works. And so I'd like to do that and then kind of come up with next steps, how we think it is. Maybe there are 3 of us that then sort of work with Carly to put it out or something like that. I mean, I think that's where we sort of can get into the nitty-gritty, which you did do here. I just don't know that this is the format of this board meeting to get into the nitty-gritty of how we want to go about doing this. That's personally how I feel.
Mr. Watson?
Yeah, I completely agree, Ms. Babb. I listed all the groups I did talk to. The one group I couldn't talk to by myself was this group. So I appreciate that. And again, as I stated, I mean, the values that drive me is community and collaboration. And I feel that not just in the sense of the larger community, but also within this body. And it's one of the things that again, I mean, we can't change those laws right here, but somebody mentioned this earlier. It is one of the problems with open meeting and sunshine laws. Not that we should do the public's business in private, but it is hard to collaborate on process and how we move something forward and things like that. And so, you know, anytime that we can do that and especially stretch those muscles as a body and as an elected body, I think it actually makes us more productive and more willing to engage one another. Because as we all know, we're not going to agree on every single issue, but the more we actually get into an issue and work it together, the more we appreciate where people's values are and how we move forward. So I'm always game for that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Watson. I think Mr. McMillan's light was on, and then Ms. Satterfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All I was going to say is, Ms. Babb, if you would feel more comfortable having an initial meeting before we did this, that would be fine. And maybe we should go to there somewhere that's centrally located where everybody feels safe. But we could either go to Holston, we could go to Central, we could go to Fulton. All those are, no matter where you're coming from, if you can get to the interstate, you can get there. And if you're not, it's not that far away. You know, it's not like you have to drive from Farragut to Carter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McMillan. Okay, Ms. Satterfield.
Yes, I support us getting together to have a conversation in central locations to have a larger conversation in the community. I will just say that I want to make sure that we move this topic with urgency because we want to see something different come August when the kids come back to school. And then I also I deal heavily with unintended consequences. And I know that this is not Daniel's heart, and it's definitely not my heart. It's just unfortunate now that this has blown up to where people do feel unappreciated, or that we did have a lot of comments that are thinking that the board is immediately deciding to take police out of our schools. And that's not the case at all. It's figuring out what does safety look like for certain communities. And I don't know where Mayor Kincannon's decision came from, but I am highly concerned on what does the rest of our school year look like with KPD being withdrawn, knowing that we have short manpower from our end as well. And so I'm hopeful that we can figure that out, but that is an unintended consequence. That letter that came out that confused the community, and then also Mayor Kincannon's rapid decision is an unintended consequence that we did not want to happen. So I just want to make sure that the board is understanding of that.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the amount of time that this is likely to take, I would ask that whatever we do, that we find an outside facilitator who is not a part of the executive team, so that additional work is not put on one person.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Watson?
Yeah, I think I appreciate Ms. Owen's comment, and I do think that's an idea that we can articulate more in our session that we want to have. I do think outside facilitation is really important. But the other thing I want people to know, and this is for the public, because I don't think everybody fully understands how this stuff works, is if you saw the resolution ahead of time, you saw that Ms. Satterfield co-sponsored it. So where I said that I haven't met with this whole body, I haven't met with Ms. Satterfield about this either. That's not how this works. I sent the resolution through Ms. Coatney to the whole board and asked if anybody wanted to sponsor it as it was written, and Ms. Satterfield signed on. So I just want everybody to know that it's not like we pick and choose who we want to work with, to get to something. It's kind of like, hey, here's our idea. If anybody wants to sign on, let me know, that kind of thing. So I think that's just an important education piece.
Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Watson. Ms. Satterfield, your light's still on. Okay. Thank you. And I think it sounds like we have kind of a rough plan, so good conversation. Thank you for the work that you did put into this and raising the issue, and so we will go from here. All right. So now we will move to items D and E, and if I could, just before we move into these two, into this topic, obviously we've had strong opinions on both sides of the issue of masks, and we've heard clearly from both sides. As you know, last week the law department asked that we hold a special called meeting to discuss the issue. Since that did not happen, we'll have that conversation again this evening. As a reminder to the board, this board can amend language to any motion that is made or agenda item. This has never been an issue with our board in the past, and I hope it will not be going forward. I'd like to thank those who have engaged in this process on both sides of the issues, whether you've called or emailed, come to meetings, spoken at public forum. I appreciate you using and exercising your First Amendment right and engaging in the process. We have been elected to represent our constituents, but it's vital that we hear from you so that we can adequately represent you. The reason we've talked about masks so much over the past few months is because that's what we've heard from the public most often about. When I have personally advocated for band and theater students not to have to wear masks during performances or kids not to wear masks during recess, this is because that's what my constituents have been asking me to advocate for. These things don't affect my family at all. I'm simply advocating for my constituents, and that's what we're all here to do. So with that, hopefully we can have a good conversation about this issue, and I'd like to move to item D, which is approving the suspension of policy B200, which would require the 2 readings of the board policy C240 face coverings, allowing approval or denial of a revised policy on 1 reading. And Ms. Babb asked that these 2 items be added. So if Ms. Babb, if you would like to speak to this, you're welcome to.
Sure, and one thing I would like to say, and I think this sort of addresses what Ms. Horn has said, is we are a 9-person board, and we represent different parts of our community, and honestly, I think we've all represented our community, and it just kind of shows we are very divisive on this, and I think that kind of has come about, and I mean, I think we all hear from our constituents, and we are trying to represent the constituents in our area, but at the end of the day, we have to come together about something. So, what I am suggesting, and let me read what this says. Basically, let me get to it, and I need my reading glasses, sorry. The face mask requirement will end on Wednesday, May 26th, and until August 1st, 2021, the Knox County schools will follow the current Tennessee Department of Health guidelines, which state that masks are recommended but optional. So that is what I am putting forward. Mr. Thomas sent this to us Thursday as his recommendation. I had the same thoughts. I think this goes along with what our governor has recommended. He asked that we kind of get rid of mask mandates by the end of May. I know that there are many different views on how we should do this or should have done this before, but this is what I'm putting forward now, and I know that I'll let Ms. Owen speak to, I think she maybe has some thoughts. Well, I'll let Ms. Horn call on her, but
Okay.
Ms. Horn had some different thoughts to slightly clarify, I think, what I had put
Ms. Owen
forward.
did.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm
Ms.
getting
Owen,
things mixed up, sorry.
thank you, Ms. Babb.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask Mr. Dupler to help me with some of this language in just a minute. My suggestion is that instead of making this two different motions next week, that we make it one motion, and it would be a motion to suspend policy B200 and waive the second reading to amend policy C240 with the following language. This policy shall sunset at 5 p.m. on May 26th to be superseded by the Knox County Schools 2021-22 opening plan, which includes flexibility for the director of schools to adjust face mask requirements based on public school recommendations from the Tennessee Department of Health. And if Mr. Dupler could clarify what those recommendations are, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Thank you, Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Owen. So the Tennessee Department of Health has issued recommendations for the management of COVID in schools. That was initially put out last year, 2020. The last real substantive update was March 29th of this year. There was an update in April 6th, but that was a very minor, says format changes. So, but this is the most current set of recommendations. And to Ms. Owen's point, I mean, what this set of recommendations says about face coverings, masks, first it says overarching recommendations. It says the CDC recommends consistent and correct use of face masks in public settings around people who do not live in the same household, especially if difficult to maintain physical distancing. And then I'll read out of student considerations first, and I'll go back to staffing. But under student considerations, universal and correct use of face masks by students, unless under age 2, sleeping, or unable to remove their face mask without assistance. And then if you look under staffing considerations, universal and correct use of face masks should be required. So that's the current recommendations from the Tennessee Department of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Ms. Christie?
Yeah, my preference in, well, first, let me tell you why. Vaccines are widely available now. As we heard Dr. Child say, vaccines are the end game. And I'm certainly not advocating for mandatory vaccines. I'm just saying they are widely available for anyone who wants to get one. And I feel like by August, everyone who wants one will have had the opportunity to receive one. So I personally...
Excuse me, you can sign up to speak at public forum next week.
My preference would be to change the policy to the face mask requirement will end on Wednesday, May 26th. And just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Christie. Ms. Bounds?
Yeah, I would support ending it on May the 26th and leaving it like that. And maybe this needs to wait until June, but I think that nothing has changed going forward. If we follow the Tennessee Department of Health recommendations, unless they make a major update, which Mr. Dupler has said the last time was March the 29th, and we know a lot's changed since then we're basically where we were this year, if I understand Mr. Dupler correctly. Teachers are wearing face masks, students are wearing face masks, and what was the other one? I don't remember. Children under 2, which doesn't pertain to us particularly. But I don't see that anything's changed with this. So I can support whatever tonight possibly, but I will be bringing something to the board in June to revisit the superintendent's proposal that we voted on last time.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Owen?
Hi, Madam Chair. This may be a point of order. I would just like to ask that if we're going to have people yelling out and interrupting our meetings, that we do ask them to leave. I don't want a repeat of what we've had before, and our staff shouldn't be subjected to that. So if we are going to have people that refuse to follow our basic civility, that we go ahead and ask them to leave. The point of this change that I made is so that whatever the state health department does, this gives Superintendent Thomas the flexibility to follow that without us having to rehash it all again. So if they changed everything tomorrow and something else came out, he would have the ability to adjust as necessary so that he could make those decisions. I think while we were in a significant emergency situation, I think it's important that we had that policy to back up everything that we were doing. But as we are moving forward, this is more of an administrative issue, and I think it's important to return that to the administration. The dates that I had here for the ending and the opening plan is so that this could also cover what we did last time, so that it would sort of roll back and take care of summer school, so that we wouldn't have those 2 months with nothing. So that's the goal there, is to allow the director of schools to make those adjustments as necessary based on the recommendations from the Tennessee Department of Health.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Ms. Babb?
I guess I want some clarification from Mr. Dupler. And, the way that it was written, and my understanding of the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines was that masks are recommended but not required, which I interpret to mean optional. Kind of hearing the way you're reading it makes it sound like they're required, not recommended. Can you? And like I said, I might have missed some wording, so.
Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the word optional does not appear in the recommendations. However, our office takes the position that these are recommendations. That's what they are. The governor has stated that there's never been a mask mandate in Tennessee. So, these are truly recommendations. And the line that I read about the CDC, it says recommends. It doesn't say mandates. The line that I read about student considerations, it's a consideration, not a mandate. Same with the staffing. It says staffing considerations, not a mandate. Now, probably the strongest language is around the staffing, but it says should be required. It says universal and correct use of face masks should be required. It doesn't say must, doesn't say will. So I apologize if there's any type of misunderstanding, but this language does not require a mandate.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Does that answer your question, Ms. Babb?
Yes, I guess, so we feel like the wording of Tennessee Department of Health guidelines is recommended but optional, is in line with the health department for right now. We all realize Tennessee Health Department, as I keep telling people, a year ago, none of us ever saw any of this coming. None of us can predict what August is. We're all hoping it just gets better and better and better. But right now, we're following it. We can go along with kind of the recommended but optional is the way we're interpreting it. Is that incorrect?
So I guess my question would be, if this is the verbiage, what would the intent be then for August 1st? Because this is a recommendation, it's not a mandate.
Right, and actually, what I'm hoping, unless the Tennessee Department of Education, Tennessee Department of Health changes things, if I'm interpreting it right, come August 1 and when we start school, it would also be a recommended but optional, which pretty much is then people could decide if they wanted to wear a mask, they could wear a mask. If they didn't want to wear a mask, they didn't have to wear a mask unless the Tennessee Health Department came out with stronger language mandating it, or the governor. There could be another emergency order or something like that. What I was hoping was we could go forth, unless something changes in the future, that it is a recommended but optional. And I'm just not sure if that's what I was hoping for, but I'm not sure.
Okay, Ms.
I don't know
Rounds.
that we're all interpreting it the same way.
Actually, Mr. Watson may have been first and then Ms. Bounds. I think Mr. Watson was first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm frankly kind of surprised that the Tennessee Department of Health has not come out with new recommendations since the governor made his statement. I mean, to have them on March 29th, I know that there's been some press releases and press conferences and things like that. I don't think as a body, any of us want to make policy based on press conferences. That's probably not a good strategy. And the point that we talked about 3 weeks ago, and I know a point that I was elevating, is that whatever this body ends up doing, I think it's really important for the public to know who is it that we're going to for guidance. And the vote that we had 3 weeks ago was a 5-4 vote for following the superintendent's recommendations for the 21-22 school year, which essentially says the exact same thing as Ms. Owen's recommendation, that we would follow the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines no matter what they say as they changed, and superintendent and his team would have the ability to adjust. We also, at a 9-0 vote, approved sunsetting the policy August 1. And I think the reason that happened at that point, if I'm remembering correctly, is because we did talk about, as Ms. Owen said, if we sunset it earlier, what happens in that 2-month window where we still have kids going to school. And so I think the attempt here that Ms. Owen is making is basically keeping the same decision we made 3 weeks ago. We're just advancing it. We're just saying, let's take the line where the two things connect, the policy ending and the recommendation starting, and let's just advance it forward 2 months. And frankly, I can say that I can get in favor of that. The whole reason I didn't want to do May 3 weeks ago is because I thought it was not fair to our parents and to our families and to the public to have this really ambiguous 2 or 3 month period in the summer. I do think it's important, Ms. Babb, to dig into that conversation about recommended or optional. As far as I know, anything that I've read in the CDC or Tennessee Department of Health, that all of those are basically recommendations. The CDC does not mandate specific actions, and the Tennessee Department of Health, I don't think, is going to mandate specific actions. And so if we take the word recommended and make it synonymous with optional, then basically everything we just did this past year, we did as an option. And I don't know that that was the intent of the superintendent when he made his plan last year. So instead of saying recommended but optional, I would say, let's stick with recommended because that's what it actually says, and then let's do it in the same way we've been doing it, which is if it's been recommended by that body, then we've adhered to it. So I can be supportive of the way that Ms. Owen has framed the language. And I also thought this was interesting. I don't know if all the board members have had a chance to look at it yet, but the TSBA, which is the Tennessee School Board Association, did a survey actually the day the governor made his announcement, or the day after the governor made his announcement. I can't remember quite when. But if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, so they call it mask mandates, which is not the right language. But we have 95 counties in the state of Tennessee, for those who aren't fully aware of that. 69 of them, so 73%, have had some form of mask mandate in schools since COVID. Since the governor's announcement, 23 of them, or 24% of them, said they were going to review whatever their current mandate was. And then I thought this was interesting. 53 of them, 56% of them said we intend to keep whatever version of our current mandate we have related to masks through the end of the school year. So I think that's, again, I think it falls in line with what Ms. Babb said and kind of where the governor's at and others, is that let's not make any change before the end of the school year. I mean, it seems like that's even where the majority of counties are doing across the state of Tennessee. And I think that's really interesting given that outside of the 6 counties that have their own health departments, it's really up to the governor, basically. And what they've said, 53 of them have said is, hey, we're going to keep doing what we're doing through the end of the school year, even with the governor's comments. So I don't know. I didn't know if everybody had a chance to read that, but I thought that was important. And I'm really only stating this again because a number of people emailed me and felt bad that they weren't included on my spreadsheet last time, and so I promised them that they would be included. So since this past Friday, I've gotten another 60 emails, so it's 393 total since 2 days before that Friday meeting. And the number did decrease a little bit in terms of those who were in favor of masks. It's now 67% said that they would prefer us to continue to keep masks through the end of the year, where I think it was 73% on Friday. So for whatever that's worth, some people want to make memes of my spreadsheets.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Okay, Ms. Bounds?
Thank you. What I understand, and Mr. Dupler, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we've heard that school boards have the power to decide whether to mask or unmask. And according to Tennessee Code Annotated, the board has one employee, and that's the superintendent of schools. So this board could follow the governor and the mayor's recommendation and vote to direct the superintendent for the children to be mask-free for 21 and 22. Is that accurate, Mr. Dupler?
Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Yes, that's accurate.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So, like I said, I will be bringing back something to this board in June if the action is not taken next week. For now, I am perfectly fine in supporting Ms. Christie's initiative to end this on May 26th, period. And that's what I will support on the voting meeting. But I do think we have to be, I think there's too much confusion out there in the public, like Ms. Babb. I mean, I was confused. Optional, recommended, and I think that word recommended leaves open the door for this, if we follow the Tennessee Department of Health's recommendations next year, that our school year will look just like this school year, and I think that's very unfair to the children of Knox County when, and I know you all get tired of hearing my illustrations, but it's very true. I think I've put it away now, it's not up on my phone. Several weeks ago, y'all heard about my baseball experience? Well, I had a soccer experience, and I went to a city-owned park with 8 fields. Every field was filled with players, parents, grandparents, at least 400 cars in the parking lot. So if you take those 400 cars and multiply those by players and parents, you're looking at a very large crowd, not one mask. This past weekend, I traveled to a softball tournament in, where did we go? Yeah, another city, and those people playing in that tournament, there were 49 teams from all over the area and out of state. Not one mask in the entire park. So I understand that we're inside a building, but I still, with the numbers and everything that's happening, I do not understand why our children are still wearing masks for next year. So anyway, I support Ms. Christie. I'll let somebody else have the floor, but I will bring something back to this board to reconsider in June.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. We'll go to Ms. Satterfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As for this particular decision, the Board of Education made a decision on April 14th. The only thing that changed from then to now are the decisions that was made from the governor and the mayor. It's been stated many times that Knox County School Board and the superintendent makes the decision for Knox County schools. I think we're moving into dangerous territory by letting governing bodies influence and possibly dictate how we run Knox County schools. So I do feel like this will pass, and that's what it will be. But my vote will be a constant reminder to not undermine the Board of Education, and so I will not support this for that reason.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Ms. Henderson?
I just want to say I also support Ms. Christie's recommendation of just the language of ending it on Wednesday, May 26th. That way there's no confusion. I read it a few times too, and every time I could read it differently or interpret it differently. So I think that way it eliminates the confusion and moves us forward to normalcy.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Ms. Satterfield? Okay, thank you. Okay, and I too would support Ms. Christie if you bring an alternate motion for the 26th. I think that would just be less confusing and provide clarity. So thank you for that conversation, and I think that we're ready to move to public forum, Ms. Babb. Actually, do we need to take a break first at 6:52?
We have 23 public
Yes.
forum speakers.
So let's take a 10-minute recess, please. Thank you.
Yes, we appreciate everybody coming for public forum. I would like to just go over some of our kind of rules. Public forum speakers shall address remarks to the entire board and not to individual members. Each person speaking shall state his or her name and county of residence and have up to 5 minutes to make remarks. The board respects and appreciates the good intentions that bring citizens to speak at public forum. The board asks that speakers show their respect for the board, the staff, and other citizens by speaking in a manner that is civil and courteous. The chair or vice chair shall have the authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who is disruptive, degrading, and or insulting, or who does not adhere to public forum rules. And I'd also like to just add that I hope everybody is respectful for every speaker that comes to speak, even if they have diverse opinions. I mean, that is what public forum's about, and I hope that our audience will respect each of our public forum speakers. First, we have Sherry Garrett.
I'm here.
Oh.
My name is Sherry Garrett, and I'm in Knox County. It's a myth that masks prevent viruses from spreading. The overall evidence is clear. Standard cloth and surgical masks offer next to no protection against virus-sized particles or small aerosols. The size of a virus particle is much too small to be stopped by a surgical mask, cloth, or bandana. A single virion of SARS-CoV-2 is about 60 to 140 nanometers, or 0.1 microns. The pore size in a surgical mask is 200 to 1,000 times that size. Consider the CDC website states, surgical masks do not catch all harmful particles in smoke, and that size of smoke particles in a wildfire are 0.5 microns, which is 5 times the size of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Wearing a mask to prevent catching SARS-CoV-2 or similarly sized influenza is like throwing sand at a chain-link fence. It does not work. There has been one large randomized controlled trial that specifically examined whether masks protect their wearers from the coronavirus. This study found mask wearing did not reduce at conventional levels of statistical significance the incidence of SARS-CoV-2 infection. All parties mandating the use of face masks are not only willfully ignoring established science, but are engaging in what amounts to a whole school clinical experimental trial. This conclusion is reached by the fact that face mask use and COVID-19 incidents are being reported in scientific opinion pieces, that face mask use and COVID-19 incidents are being promoted by the CDC and others. The fact is, after reviewing all of the studies worldwide, the CDC found no reduction in viral transmission with the use of face masks. Regardless of the lack of safety and efficacy behind the decision to require a child to wear a mask, it is illegal to mandate EUA-approved investigational medical therapies without informed consent. Mask use for viral transmission prevention is authorized for emergency use only. Emergency use authorization by the FDA means the products are investigational and experimental. The statute granting the FDA the power to authorize a medical product of emergency use requires that the person being administered the unapproved product be advised of his or her right to refuse administration of the product. This statute further recognizes the well-settled doctrine that medical experiments or clinical research may not be performed on human subjects without the express informed consent of the individual receiving the treatment. The right to avoid the imposition of human experimentation is fundamental. Rooted in the Nuremberg Code of 1947, has been ratified by the 1964 Declaration of Helsinki, and further codified in the United States Code of Federal Regulations. In addition to the United States regarding itself as bound by these provisions, these principles were adopted by the FDA and its regulations requiring informed consent of human subjects for medical research. The law is very clear. It is unlawful to conduct medical research, even in the case of emergency, unless steps are taken to secure informed consent of all participants. Furthermore, by requiring children to wear a mask, you are promoting the idea that the mask can prevent or treat a disease, which is an illegal deceptive practice. It is unlawful to advertise that a product or service can prevent disease unless you possess competent and reliable scientific evidence substantiating these claims are true. The FDA EUA for surgical and or cloth masks explicitly states, the labeling must not state or imply that the mask is intended for antimicrobial or antiviral protection or related or for use of such as infection prevention or reduction. If you look at the box containing masks, masks do not claim to keep out viruses. There are no efficacy standards on child-sized masks and respirators under OSHA, but there are proven microbial challenges as well as the breathing difficulties that are created and exacerbated by masking children. Requiring children to wear a mask sets the stage for contracting any infection, including COVID-19, and making the consequences of that infection much graver. In essence, a mask may very well put children at increased risk of infection, and if so, having a far worse outcome. The fact that mask wearing presents a severe risk of harm to the wearer should, standing alone, not be required for children, particularly given that these children are not ill and have done nothing wrong that would warrant an infringement of their constitutional rights and bodily autonomy. Promoting the use of a non-FDA approved emergency use authorized mask is unwarranted and illegal. This mandate is in direct conflict with Section 360 BBB-3, which requires the wearer to be informed of the option to refuse the wearing of such device. I'll go to the last sentence here.
Thank you. I'm going to have to stop you at this point. Thank you very much for speaking. Michael Lett.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to begin by taking a moment to
hold on just a
express-
second. Could you just, I'm sorry, say your name,
that's-
and, yeah, that's fine. Your name and your county of residence, and the 5 minutes will start.
Sure. My name is Michael Lett, and I am a resident of Knox County. I want to begin by taking a moment to express my gratitude to the school board members, the superintendent, for allowing me to address the body. I commend each of you for taking a leadership role in helping to steward our educational system for Knox County. Additionally, I'd like to thank the teachers, staff, students, and parents who have persevered through this school year. Most of what I will say was prepared prior to Friday's meeting where the agenda failed to pass, and I chose to come back today because I feared some not-so-friendly amendments being made to alter what was on the agenda. I come to you to discuss 2 of those items. First, there's an item on the agenda to suspend rules and waive first reading of the proposal to come before the board. I ask that you take a moment to think about the intent behind having 2 readings of the proposal before it becomes policy. This 2-reading rule at its heart allows for time to consider, discuss in open forum, seek other opinions, receive input from constituents, reflect, and then bring them back for a second reading for another round of discussion and voting. In this situation, please ask yourself, why are you voting to suspend your own rules? There is still time to complete 2 readings of the proposal before the school year begins next year. Second is the issue many want to discuss. Should masks be required in public schools in Knox County? This issue goes beyond whether or not you believe masks work or not. Armchair researchers can find information to support either side. What I want to discuss is why would the policy need to be changed? What benefit would it provide? I have gone through the thought process in my mind, as I'm sure each of you have, and put time and effort into your thoughts, but here are some of mine. There are literally 13.5 instructional days left in this school year. To make a change now disrupts the routine, policies, and procedures that each student, teacher, staff member, and parent have adapted to over the course of this extraordinary year. In the last meeting, you heard from a principal saying that the schools have this under control and not to change the game when they are at 4th and goal. With less than 10% of the instructional days left, please don't change the rules. Second, there are 13.5 instructional days left in the school year. To make a change now changes the rules present for parents as they made their difficult decision to send their students to in-person classrooms or to support them through virtual learning. You asked the parents to make this decision for a semester at a time based upon the best information they had at that moment. My wife and I, prior to sending our 10-year-old son to school this year, called, spoke with his principals to understand what rules would be in place in the school, and I would say not recommended rules or optional rules, but the rules that would be in place in the school, and then made the difficult decision to go ahead and send him to class. We did the same thing when asked to commit another time in November. I know other parents went through this same process and each made the decision for their own unique situation. To change the rules now at this time would be disrespectful to those parents and undermine the decisions that each of them made. And finally, is the potential for bullying to occur in the last 13.5 days of this school year. Elementary, middle, and high school children elementary, middle, and high school are some of the toughest times on children, with peer pressure and bullying being a key reason behind those challenges. Each student faces challenges, whether it is the clothes they wear, the shoes they have, or the shape of their body. The presence or non-presence of face masks presents one more challenge. I have been assured that students and staff can certainly wear a mask if they are more comfortable with one. However, the possibility of mass bullying does not exist if they are all required to wear one. Taking the time to properly prepare for this potential item next school year could be extremely helpful. As we saw at the conclusion of the meeting last Friday, those who choose not to wear a mask are very good at bullying others, as evidenced by their comments and yelling. In conclusion, if you vote to remove your 2 reading requirement and then additionally to pass this immediate sunset of the policy, granted it will be at the end of this school year, you do so not for the benefit of children. You do it because you are making a political statement about masks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sam Brown. And if you'll state your name and county of residence, and you get 5 minutes to speak.
I'm Sam Brown. I live in Knox County. We deserve the best. The events of April 12, 2021 were very eye-opening and one could argue a public administration disaster. After our district attorney reluctantly released the evidence to the public, we witnessed yet another display of the unpreparedness that continues to degrade the quality of service delivered to citizens by government. While one could make the argument that that was the expected or the inevitable outcome, I submit to you it was not the best outcome. We deserve the best. Public education and public safety are 2 of the largest line items on any municipality's budget, and we owe it to our children to be intentional with the education we give them and handle our communities with the same regard and care. We can no longer stand by and allow mediocrity to be the order of the day in Knox County. Simply put, Knox County School Board, you need our help. Let us help you. I stand in support of the resolution that was sponsored by Mr. Watson and my school board representative, Ms. Satterfield. And I would encourage you all to put your egos to the side and allow the community to participate in having input with this memorandum of agreement so that the children that we are trying to teach to secure the future for our great county receive the best education possible. We're not saying that you are incompetent. We're not saying that you don't have the skill set. All we're saying is you don't have all of the answers. Remember, pride cometh before the fall, and a haughty heart before destruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Justin Arf.
My name is Justin Arft, and I am a Knox County resident. I am also an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee and mostly study and teach on the ancient world, but none of my statements today represent the university or my professional research, but come entirely from my own perspectives and assessments as an advocate for teachers, students, and especially my children who are Knox County elementary students. Thank you all for your service, and thank you all for allowing me to speak. I do not really wish to revisit the topic of masks this evening, especially when there are so many other important and new voices to hear tonight on other resolutions. But I do have some policy concerns I think the board needs to communicate more clearly to us. Recently, this board voted to allow the current mask policy to sunset at a significantly later date with 2 main intentions driving that vote. First, the intent was to allow time to pass, monitor the local situation, and allow more people in the community, teachers especially, to become vaccinated. Second, and as further justification and rationale, you agree that once this policy sunsets, the district would follow the more nimble and current health agency guidance and recommendations. Let me immediately point out that if you were to sunset this policy at this moment, state, CDC, and local health department guidance still recommends, for good reason, masks in schools, and the state of Tennessee the Department of Health guidelines do in fact track with CDC recommendations, which currently includes 3 feet distancing with masks. Before last week's scheduled meeting, it became highly relevant that Governor Lee's executive order does not change that guidance or the enforceability of the district plan. So in effect, nothing has changed, nor is there an apparent reason to revisit a standing decision. By allowing the current emergency policy to sunset, you are not leaving a vacuum, but a previously articulated plan in place. Along those lines, the amendment under discussion tonight potentially makes a significant omission and error in addition to generating new policy by effectively ending another. On the latter point, this board sets policies of their own, and any positive recommendation that is made should be addressed, debated, and voted on separately by the board, not legislated by attaching one policy to another, one that was clearly intended only for the purposes of sunset. More importantly, the language of the amendment is both imprecise and possibly incorrect. First, the amendment references state health policy without citing it, and I think any local policy decision of this magnitude cannot leave this to guesswork. It then does something more problematic in potentially putting words in the mouth of the state's guidelines by saying that masks are optional, and I'm sorry to reiterate some of these points. Not only does this exact language not appear anywhere in the most recent guidelines from the state, but it is a potential misrepresentation of standard health policy recommendations, which this body at their last vote did agree to still follow. And I point out that the current reopening plan does in several instances implement the recommendations of the states and the CDC's guidelines. In other words, this body has not only agreed to follow these recommendations, but there is precedent for the board to implement them and interpret them as non-optional. Optional implies that there are no consequences for not doing something. CDC and state health agencies, in no uncertain terms, know that there are real epidemiological consequences for not wearing masks indoors, which is why they are still recommending masks among a nearly exclusively and confined unvaccinated population within our schools, namely our children and some teachers and staff still. If the board wishes to not implement this guidance, they not only need to admit they are doing so, but they also need to provide adequate justification for doing so. The state, the CDC, and our local experts will all tell you, on the basis of vast consensus of peer-reviewed scholarship and public health policy experts, that masks do indeed work and are still recommended in schools to mitigate the spread of this disease. They will only stop telling us that once the situation is actually managed. We are desperately close to that situation, but lifting the restrictions until we are given the actual green light by these agencies would only endanger students, and the board would potentially be implicated in doing so. In other words, you can't defer this to a non-legislative State Department of Health when they are telling you, in the necessary language of recommendation of guidelines, what is safest for our students, staff, and teachers. I urge you to very carefully consider the exact nature of the recent executive order, health recommendations, and your own ratified intentions to wait for improvements, ensure school year continuity, and rightfully adhere to agency guidelines. Weigh what we are all saying carefully against the guidance of teachers, principals, and staff, and consider that your decisions today are not given a blanket executive endorsement, but remain to be your own, and they directly affect all of our lives. I thank you, and I strongly urge you to stay the course.
Thank you very much. Cheryl Burchett. You'll state your name and county of residence.
I'm a Knox County resident. I'm Cheryl Burchett. I am a Knox County teacher. This summer, as I considered my options, I knew that this would be a difficult school year. But I felt strongly that I was needed at my school. I made the commitment to show up every day and wear a mask and sanitize desks and help my students. I kept my word. I am also a Knox County parent. This summer, as I considered my children's options, sorry, my phone skipped to a weird spot. This summer, as I considered my children's options, I knew that if I made the choice for them to be virtual, I would have to keep that commitment for an entire semester. And I did, and I kept my word. My children were virtual until the end of the semester. In the spring, when I chose to bring my son back to in-person learning, it was with the knowledge that students would be required to wear masks for the remainder of the school year. I made the commitment for him to be in person, and now I'm asking you to keep your word. Furthermore, I am also the parent of a child who struggles with reading and qualified for one of the new summer learning camps. A few weeks ago, around the time that parents were asked to choose if their children would attend those camps, we were told that masks would be required for summer programs. Lots of parents have committed for their students to do these summer programs, and I'm asking you once again to keep your word. As you consider options with regards to next fall, please remember that elementary age students will still not be eligible for vaccines. As such, I would implore you to follow the CDC recommendations, to seek community input, to look at the success of this year, when not only did we not see a COVID epidemic in our schools, for the first time in several years, we did not have to close down schools because of flu. But whatever you decide about next year, please make that decision early enough for parents to make their choices, and then I beg you, keep your word. Betsy Hobkirk.
If you'll just state your name and county of residence.
Sure. Good evening, my name's Betsy Hopkirk. I'm a Knox County resident, and I have taught elementary art with Knox County schools for 10 years. I'd like to support the proposal to review and revise the memorandum of agreement between Knox County schools and law enforcement. I also support a process that is open and involves the community input. This year, 2 of my former elementary students had traumatic, and in one case, deadly experiences with KPD officers while attending Knox County schools. The most recent is Anthony Thompson Jr.'s tragic killing at Austin East. From what we have learned, we know that he was distressed. So why didn't the officers use crisis intervention techniques? They had options to de-escalate and disarm the situation. Instead, the situation escalated, and we know, ended tragically with his death. In another incident earlier in the year, a former special ed student of mine with autism was agitated and reached a high level of crisis in school. The school KPD officer intervened, and my former student ended up getting handcuffed, was told he was going to jail, was dragged down the hallway on his belly, put in a police car where he sat for 20 minutes, was taken to juvenile detention center and charged with assault. Instead of de-escalating, the situation escalated. I taught art to both of these students when they were young boys in elementary school. They are real people to me. I taught their brothers and their sisters. Right now, both of them have younger brothers who I currently teach. I know both of their moms. They are actually my colleagues at my school. So this is personal. What happened to these young men is chilling and deeply disturbing. My understanding is the current MOA that this board approved in July 2019 instructs administrators, school principals, and school staff members to defer to KPD and KCSO officers. In the agreement, the board essentially abdicates control over which officers are assigned to our schools, how they are trained, and actions they take. My question to the board, is this true? I don't even actually know if this is actually true. I'm trying to find out. And if this is true, are you okay with this? It is time KCS reviews the MOA to ensure that every officer who enters school property is trained and certified to work with children, especially children in crisis. This is a start, but really, KCS needs to put a more solid foundation in place that can prevent traumatic and tragic incidents from happening in the first place. Young people experience distress. Young people experience crisis, and the problem's not going away. At my school, we've had multiple trainings on trauma, but we need to look at the big picture and create a trauma-informed school system that prioritizes the social and emotional needs of our students. And it has to be at all levels. Policies at the school board, central office, and elected officials pass need to be trauma-informed. So I look forward to seeing how the discussion of reviewing the MOA unfolds and participating in the process. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Desiree Dale.
My name is Desiree Dale, and I live in Knox County. I'm also a special education teaching assistant with Knox County Schools. I want to thank Betsy for bringing up my son. That was my son that she spoke of. In December, I spoke to you about an incident with my 14-year-old son who has autism. The incident he had with a school KPD officer. The incident started with my son in crisis and ended with him in handcuffs, being dragged 15 feet down the hallway and taken to the juvenile detention center. My son now will never be able to return to an in-person setting because of the trauma that was caused by that officer's response. That day, no one stepped in to help my child. No one stopped the officer and told him that my son had an extensive behavior plan that should have been followed. He even has steps in his IEP that address the behaviors he was having that day. As someone who works in special ed, I can't even imagine seeing one of my students go through what my son went through that day. We were told by multiple KCF staff that once KPD steps in, it is out of their hands. One email response I got from a Knox County employee said, quote, KCS does not oversee the KPD officers that are assigned to individual schools. That is irresponsible and dangerous for those officers not to have set guidelines from the school system when things like this happen. KPD should have a better protocol, similar to our Knox County school security officers when stepping into a situation with a child in crisis. When we watched the video, and we watched it, of my son being dragged down the hallway by that officer, we asked school security, who is separate from KPD, if their school officers would be allowed to do that same thing. We were told that Knox County school security is not allowed to restrain a special needs child in any way. I asked if handcuffs were considered a restraint. He said yes. But again, we were told KPD does not have to follow those same rules. My son is not the only child who has suffered at the hands of a KPD officer in our school buildings. Particularly after the events that occurred in the last few weeks, it is more urgent than ever for you to revisit your agreement. We want our kids to feel safe around officers in uniform, and in this current climate, we know that's harder than ever. But KPD needs to be working with the Knox County schools and the community and build a more productive agreement where there are no questions on if and when a KPD officer should proceed in an emergency situation within our school buildings and with our most precious students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. I want to make sure, Sarah Wilson, did she want to come? Okay. That's fine, we don't think. Michael O'Malley. Just state your name and county of residence.
Hi, I'm Michael O'Malley, and I live in Knox County. Members of the board, I'm a teacher at Carter High School. I need to stress that these are my own personal opinions, and they don't necessarily represent my school or my colleagues. But I am here to speak in favor of the resolution that KCS review and revise its agreements with Knox County Sheriff's Department, as well as Knoxville Police Department, through open community engagement. Since I began teaching, I have been uncomfortable with the presence of police at schools, and I hope to communicate why tonight. Part of this discomfort has come from my own observations when I have sometimes seen officers wielding power over students in inappropriate ways. I have seen school resource officers make fun of and belittle students. I have seen officers watching videos on their phones of fights between students and laughing. I have seen a student, I teach a journalism class, and this student was requesting an interview with an officer who accepted the request for an interview only to give joking and bogus answers to belittle the student and befuddle them. Admittedly, teachers also don't always treat students with respect either, but teachers do not do so with weapons at their hips, nor the weight of law enforcement behind them. With the police, the power dynamic between officers and students is far more lopsided, to a degree that I think needs to give us great pause. On an even more serious note, I have seen students apprehended and arrested for nonviolent behavior, and I have seen officers present during disciplinary actions that did not result in arrests. These are rare occurrences, but they loom large in the collective imagination of students. Again, I come back to that gun and the power of law enforcement. The presence of officers at schools is a promise of arrests, of the possibility of that gun going off. However, seldom that occurs. Why, after all, do we have officers in our schools? It's not to simply befriend students, to help with bus boarding, or to watch security footage, because anyone can do those things. The unique set of skills and possibilities that a law enforcement officer specifically brings to a school is that officer's legal ability to arrest, apprehend, and use force. I am not saying that all SROs have malicious intentions in their interactions with students. I have to assume that most, if not all of them, are in the unglamorous role of being a school officer because they care for others. Nor am I saying that everything that these officers do is harmful, because it's not. But what I am saying is that the intentions and moral character of individual officers do not change the intimidating effect that the presence of officers can have on some students, nor do individual actions change the purpose of these officers at schools, to arrest and to enact violence when deemed necessary. I realize that for some, these officers' abilities are comforting, but we have to recognize, as others have shared tonight, that for others, the sight of an officer or the idea of an officer arresting or using force is unnerving and even frightening, and that the reasons why some might feel this way about officers are valid. Some may feel uncomfortable at the presence of a loaded firearm in a school. Others may have seen parents or loved ones arrested by the police. Others may have seen police detain family members and as a result have the process of deportation initiated. Students of color may have been profiled or have seen others profiled, and others may have experienced brutality from the police. Still others, as we have heard from tonight, have experienced this within schools, and the presence of officers in schools means that these experiences are not just baggage that students bring to schools, but baggage that we allow to occur within our schools. Placing officers in schools means that we are tacitly accepting the possibility that an officer may arrest or use force on someone inside a school, and this isn't just an idle hypothetical. As we, of course, all know, last month an officer, not all of whom were designated school officers, but one of whom was, were involved in killing a student at a Knox County high school. And would anyone blame any student at Austin East for being afraid of officers at their school after that? When students are afraid or intimidated or at risk of being arrested or even shot, how can we expect them to commit themselves to learning? The safety and comfort of the students in our schools should be one of our highest priorities. But what I hope I have conveyed tonight is that the presence of law enforcement does not communicate safety and security to everyone, which is why I think it is important that we allow everyone impacted to have a voice in how our schools are kept safe. I don't come here claiming to have answers. Keeping our schools safe is a complicated problem that, as far as I know, has not been solved by anyone. And as I said minutes ago, I can't speak for anyone but myself, but I would say that neither can Knox County schools claim to speak for everyone in the community either, as the current agreement with Knox County Sheriff's Office, as well as Knoxville Police Department, was agreed upon without comprehensive community engagement. We need to let the community speak for itself. And as someone who teaches within District 8, I can also say that just the average opinions of the board representing my district are not necessarily representative of the emails that I have sent to the people who represent the district that I teach in either, which is why we need open meetings as opposed to just general vibes gathered from emails. Please vote for this resolution next week, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Gordon Gibson.
I'm Reverend Gordon Gibson. I'm a Knox County resident, live in the Park Ridge community, actually in the former Park Junior High. I'm here today to speak strongly in favor of the intent of the resolution brought by Mr. Watson and Ms. Satterfield. 2 years ago, I was one of the citizens who spoke and emailed to the board as the current MOA was under consideration. Among the specific suggestions that I made to the board was that the MOA should specify that SROs are to support and not supersede the directions of principals, teachers, and other staff, that they were to be trained in how to de-escalate, to understand PBIS and restorative practices. I also remember at that meeting a relatively new board member named Satterfield brought a resolution that no student would be handcuffed. It was suggested, oh, that would be more properly dealt with as a policy. And the response to our suggestions, crickets. Let me tell you a story about my granddaughter's high school. One day, the principal, others in the school office, witnessed a shooting outside the school on the sidewalk. They put the school in lockdown, keep students and staff safe, called 911, and the principal went to the entrance, knowing that police would be arriving soon. Police did indeed arrive, fully armed, ready for action, ready to come in the school. The principal, an Asian American woman of relatively short stature, said, "No, you are not coming in my school." The shooting was on the sidewalk. The shooter went that way. If you want the shooter, you go that way. You will not come in my building and terrify my students, brandishing weapons. She made her point stick. I don't need to tell you that high school was not in Knox County. It was not operating under the MOA that we have now. It was in San Francisco, California. That action by that principal protecting those students is unimaginable under our current MOA. I want it to become imaginable. I want it to become expectable. I encourage you to have the conversation that I heard all of you commit to. I urge you to use outside facilitation. I urge you to appropriate money, to bring in outside expertise. I urge you, involve us in the community. We have opinions, and experiences that need to be included. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kristen Hancock. You'll state your name and county of residence.
My name is Kristen Hancock, and I live in Knox County. I'm a parent of 2 young boys that are in the Knox County schools. Today, I actually wanted to address the mask policy, but I do want to actually speak as well on this topic of security and law enforcement within the school system. I think that any of our policymakers and lawmakers, more importantly, over anything, anybody's opinion, I think that you guys should understand the job of an officer. And most agencies, or many, I wouldn't say most, but many agencies offer what they call citizen police academies. And I believe that at some point they have done them with some of the agencies here. I know this personally from the state of Alabama. But I think that when you understand what an officer does, what their job is, what they have to face, I think that you can better serve your constituents because you're able to educate them a little more on some of the things that they may have concerns on that they also don't understand what these officers' jobs are. If you're going to make policies, you need to know what they're facing as officers, and we need to be offering them as much support as possible, asking them what equipment they need, what is there anything that we can do to make your job easier?
Please respect our speakers.
Because I think that when we have that understanding, we can start to address the other issues and concerns of people. But that is so important. I think that every one of you should want to know and understand a police officer's job and inquire with the agencies here on a training program like Citizens Police Academy that gives you a real in-depth understanding. They can be short, they can be a week or 2 weeks long. After normal business hours, there's many ways that they do it, but I think that that would help in a lot of ways. Our officers, they're there to protect, right? And the best policing is being seen. Their presence needs to be there because you have no idea how many crimes have been avoided because of their presence just being there. But I think that we also need to understand that this is about the relationship between the officers and the students. They're in the schools because we have students, we have situations, crisis situations that happen, and we need to understand that that relationship is between them and not the outside. Because I think that there's a lot of groups, a lot of people with different motives, a lot of people that want to complain, they want to talk about police this, police that, and everything they do wrong, but we're not addressing that, okay, let's see what this relationship is like with these officers in the schools, because these officers do make a difference in these kids' lives, and I think if we stop all the noise from outside, we can actually learn more about what they are doing that is good and positive, and where we can help them and support them in their efforts to make a difference in these kids' lives, because they do develop relationships with kids and they do help them and they are an advocate for them. And a lot of times these kids are being told at home that, you know, police are bad, you know, you can't trust them, they're out to get you, they're all liars, they're all out to frame you. You know, there's all kinds of things that these kids hear from their home, and they also, you know, hear stories from family members, and that really influences their behavior too in the presence of an officer, because they're having this outside influence and they're being taught all these things. And in reality, these children need to know that they can trust these officers. And I will say another thing, that officers have to act in a split second. They have a split second. Their job is to stop a threat if there is a threat. And I think that we have to understand the bigger picture and what that job is. Although they have to do a lot of things, they have to pull a lot of tools out of their box. They have to be a counselor sometimes. They have to be a rescue personnel. They have to, help with a medical situation. There are a lot of things, but when it comes down to it, they're not psychologists. Their job is to protect and to serve. And if there are resources that these families are asking for that they need, especially hearing stories about people who have been traumatized because their child's been traumatized seeing something, this is something that can be addressed with the psychologists that we have in our schools. I do know that there is a program that can help on this counseling side because students may have deeper issues. Officers can't be expected to have to address these more in-depth issues. They're there with training that is to protect, right? And emotional well-being is important.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you speaking.
I didn't even get
Excuse me. We have respect. We've talked about this. We are here to respect every single person that comes to speak. People have different opinions. Please respect everyone that speaks. We as a board respect them, and we expect you to also. Lisa Taylor.
I'm Lisa Taylor, and I'm from Knox County 37938. I've approached all of you before. You've seen me before. You've heard me before. You've heard my kids speak as well. I asked them tonight if they wanted to speak again, and honestly, they've both said, we've spoken before, and they don't listen. That's their perspective as teenagers, so I let them stay home this evening. But I just wanted to mention something. I have emailed all of you regarding plans for the upcoming graduation ceremonies. I appreciate those of you who took the time to respond about your concerns and bringing the attention of this to the board and those who are making decisions. I pray that as you deliberate what to do with the face covering policy, that you think about the upcoming graduation ceremonies. We've talked before about the fact that the policies should be different for outside with distancing, and I still think that it's still up to interpretation. It sounds like in different schools and different administrations. But as far as the graduates go, at least at our high school, last year they were well distanced on the football field. I believe that is going to be the same process again for them this year. My daughter, who's a senior, is the graduate, she is a madrigal. The madrigals are planning to sing at the high school graduation. That's kind of a tradition. And right now they'll be masked again on the field outside, as they have been for their whole singing career this senior year. So I would like for our seniors personally to have one last opportunity this year to be unmasked on their school property. And so I would just like everyone to think about that when the decision is made regarding the masks, face coverings. I would also respectfully ask that whatever decision is made regarding the face coverings, and quite frankly, all other activities such as the contact tracing, quarantining, whatever the policies will be going forward for the 2021-22 school year, that the policy's verbiage cannot be left up to interpretation, that it must be clear and concise language so that all principals and admin teams will be doing the same thing across the county in the schools. It's still, as I mentioned before, as far as the outdoors, masking outdoors, everybody's doing something different. And I think that that's unfair to the students across the county. Lastly, I'm just going to make some comments. These were from friends of mine when I asked, what do you want me to say to the board if you can't come? Take off masks. Make masks optional. Please, no more mask requirements. Make them optional. Masks off. Optional for those who want them, but not mandatory. Look how masks have created a divide in our community. Allow people to make decisions for their own children. What is the rationale for why some do not trust parents to parent their own children? I think there is no reason for masking children. Masks off. Make it optional. End of discussion. Say no to masks. They are too hard on special needs kids. Many special needs elementary students who have worked hard on social, emotional, and communication skills have had many declines this year. Masks have made many students feel more disconnected, and the feelings of others are harder to interpret or anticipate. Optional, because if you follow the science, the rate of death for this age group in Knoxville is 0%. Masking should be optional, period. I appreciate all of you. I know that everything that you have to deal with on a daily basis outside of just preparing for these meetings is a lot, and I respect each of you in your positions. I didn't have the opportunity to vote for any person, my own board member. I was not a U.S. citizen during the last election, and I am now. And this whole process and this whole year has changed my views on how things work from a political standpoint. Voting, not voting isn't important. And I feel like my vote now as a U.S. citizen is more important than ever. And so I hope that everybody who votes for whatever it is on this board, outside of this board, that you take your opportunity to take a vote and understand the importance of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lance McCold.
I'm Lance McCold, Knox County. Can you hear me okay? So I want to do two things. I want to offer a little clarification. And I work with the Knox County Education Coalition, and some things that there's been confusion about. The letter that the coalition sent called for removal of KCS BOE and KPD officers until we have policies and procedures in place that put them under clear control of the school system. It was not a call for them to be removed, apparently, and we had nothing to say about SSOs. They are already under control of the school system. I guess the other thing I want to say is that Mr. Watson's proposal, as he mentioned, was under the works for a long time. The coalition decided to put this statement out. Felt the urgency about it after Mr. Thompson's killing. They were completely unrelated. And so I guess that's as much as I want to say about what the coalition did to clarify. I'd like to speak at this point about my own personal thoughts. I think we need to, everything seems to get so polarized, and before we actually have the give and take, the discussion where we actually listen to each other, we drop into these my side, your side kind of thing. And these are adult games. I would beg of you and the rest of the community to let's leave our adult games behind and say, let's focus on what the kids need, not our side, my side, your side. Let's say what is the best thing for our kids. And start from there and look at the science, look at the research, look at the evidence. Let's try to do that. Let's try to step away from, we all live in a political world. It's going to be hard, but let's do that. Let's put the kids first. Let's stop trying to make these things into yes, no's. Let's try to make these things into, where's the yes for everybody? Where's the common ground? I think we all are focused on the safety of our children, and as Mr. Watson points out, what that safety, how we perceive what they need and what that safety looks like is different for each of us. I would urge us to be respectful of the idea that somebody else's idea of what safety means is a little different than ours, and I would really urge us to try really hard to hear what the kids have to say. Some people think, oh, they're just kids, but let me tell you, middle school and high school kids, they know a lot and they know what they think. We should be listening to them. And let me just say, the last thing is I want to say, I heard a lot of talk about opinions, different opinions, who's got this opinions. Let's set the opinions aside for a while. Let's go look for the facts. If we're going to deal with this MOA and what we're going to use, how we're going to have police in our schools, how we're going to keep our kids safe, let's sort of set our opinions aside. We each have our places we start. Let's set it aside and let's go for the facts. Let's do the facts first. Rather than the facts to defend the position that we're most comfortable with, let's look for the facts. Personally, I strongly support Mr. Watson's resolution, and I think you all want to have this conversation. I so wish we'd had it 2 years ago. But now, let's do it. Let's have that conversation. Let's start with the facts. Let's keep the focus on what's good for the kids. Let's keep our egos and our political positions out of it as long as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Talia Wilson. State your first name and county of residence.
Talia Wilson, Knox County Schools. I would like to start off by saying thank you for taking the time out of your day. I really appreciate you all listening to everyone and taking our words into consideration. I would like to acknowledge our police officers and all that they have done for me and my school. I go to a school right in the heart of downtown. It is an open campus that is easily accessible right next to the park and the memorial. Considering the location of the premises, we have a lot of strangers that will try and come onto campus. Some just don't know that it's a school, but some have bad intentions. Our officer has gone above and beyond to guarantee our safety. But not only that, he has offered a safe space for the children at the school to talk to him and give a shoulder to lean on. I understand the concern regarding what happened at Austin East, and I completely give my condolences to Anthony Thompson Jr.'s family. But I am personally concerned about my safety. I do think that training our officers to be more equipped to work near children is a good idea. But I don't think that taking them out of our schools is necessary. I don't feel safe going to a school without the necessary officer protection to feel safe. The Knox County Schools mission statement is to make the Knox County Schools a safe and secure learning environment for everyone. If we can't be assured that we are safe from the ones with ill will, how are we going to focus on our learning? I am not just worried about our learning on the campus. I'm worried about my high school experience. The only outdoor time that we get is the places that the campus is most exposed to. I love that we can go outside during lunch and play Foursquare and volleyball. I love that we can all go down to World's Fair Park and make memories with each other during Genius Hour. But without our officer there to ensure our safety, this would no longer be possible because we would be so exposed to the public. I also wasn't going to speak on this tonight, but I feel it was necessary. I personally don't agree with sunsetting the mask mandate in schools until the end of the school year. I don't think it is fair on the students that choose in person for this year, thinking that masks will be mandatory for everyone. However, someone mentioned mask bullying earlier tonight, and I would like to speak about that. I've always worn my mask at school because it was mandatory. I never tried to find my way around it. I just did what the board has required us to do. But that did not prevent someone from bullying me for the type of mask I was wearing. It was not mesh, it was not see-through. It was a 2-layer cloth mask, and it met every single guideline that was set in place. Yet I was still bullied for a piece of cloth on my face. I realize that there are a lot of opinions on both of these subjects. I just wanted to offer my perspective as a student, and I appreciate everyone that was willing to have a conversation about this. I feel like we could all learn so much if we just listen to each other and look at it from everyone's perspective. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for coming. Tanya Coates.
Tanya Coates, Knox County. I really came to talk about masks, but first let me address the first thing that has come up today in regards to officers, and I want to be very clear about this. Educators in Knox County do not call for the removal of officers at school. That goes for principals, teachers, cafeteria workers, anyone. We are not requesting this response. However, we are asking that whenever we have external officers come to school, that there are some policies and procedures that have been put in place. I have witnessed and sat with SROs, SSOs, principals, classroom teachers, and are being reprimanded for protecting kids within school over officers coming in and taking over. I'm asking you to look at this situation in regards to how they're being present when they come to the school and how they do check these policy and procedure check-ins. If you cannot control your own schools, and the superintendent can't control that when they come in externally, how in the heck can we control keep our kids safe in schools? We entrust that you are doing that by having our SROs. We know that it took us a long time, and I know that Mr. Smith can talk, Russ Oaks can talk about this. Russ Oaks can talk about this. It took us forever to get school security officers or get officers to help protect us in schools. At least I remind you, those came to a fruition when we had a shooting at Central, or when we had a teacher being shot at Inskip, or when we had kids that could not be protected based on what was going on, school shootings in Lonsdale. So knowing that we need officers in school, or we wouldn't have even approved, you wouldn't have approved last week of increasing their pay increase. We have got to really get on the same page when it comes to external officers coming in our school system. Our students entrust you, and our parents didn't send criminals to school. So we're just asking you to just look at the policies and procedures to help support not only the superintendent, but our schools, that our educators want our SROs and our SSOs in our schools to help us. We have built lasting relationships in our schools. And then my last and final point about this mask, and I swear I wish we weren't talking about that with 13 and a half days left of school. I understand that you want to do what's best for these kids, but you've heard from a lot of us here that you have given the authority to your superintendent and his administration. You have passed policies in regards to how masks are supposed to be mandated. But to take it away in 13 and a half days of school, knowing that if a lot of our parents remember in the last couple of years that we have not had a flu epidemic, where we had schools missing school over flus because of masks. We haven't had to have schools sit at home because of masks. We are not wanting kids to feel like they're bullied, but let me give you some key points. Kids, the key is the kids are all right. We just heard from some of them that they go to school every day and they're all right. Do we have a few of them that don't want to wear it? Heck, we got educators that don't want to wear masks. But we cannot help this. The key is reducing the risk of illness. We also know that kids are not being vaccinated. Yes, we have educators that are being vaccinated. But you know, the protection is not only for our students of wearing these masks. We're saying that it's the protection for adults that have underlying conditions, and parents entrusted us that we signed up for this. I'm just asking you for 13 and a half days. When you pass this next week, consider that by that time next week, you only have 7 and a half days. If that's really that important, we're just asking you, don't make it an issue. And then don't use educators, don't use parents, and don't use yourselves to pit each other against each other when it comes to the safety of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie Hopper.
My name is Carrie Hopper. I live in Knox County. I am a former staff member of Knox County Schools. I previously worked in special education at Fulton High School, which I'm sure all of you all know has the second highest Black student population behind Austin East and the highest Latinx student population of all of our high schools in Knox County. The majority of the students who attend Fulton live in a community that has been historically underfunded and over-policed. Most of the students I worked with come from economically disadvantaged households. Students who attend Fulton, Austin East, and all of their respective feeder schools already see a high police presence in their communities. Many of my students' parents or family members were imprisoned and or unlawfully arrested for minor crimes that white people with economic privilege living on the other side of Knoxville get away with or dismissed in court all the time. Students in these communities fear the police, and rightfully so, because every time they turn on the TV or get on their phones, they see another black person has died at the hands of a cop. Everywhere they turn in their communities, they see a KPD cruiser or an unmarked KPD SUV just waiting for them to make a mistake. So when they see a KPD officer inside their school building, those students do not feel safe. Most of you are white, like me, so maybe you don't understand that. But that's why we all need to open our ears and listen to what the people in our black and brown communities are telling us. They have been screaming this at us, so we just need to open our ears and listen to what they are saying. The students in these communities look at cops in schools and see someone who is ready to unlawfully arrest them. They see someone who carries a gun and a badge and could easily get away with murdering them at any point. After Anthony Thompson Jr. was murdered by KPD in the Austin East bathroom, students in East and North Knoxville communities now know that KPD officers can get away with killing them both on the streets and inside their schools. Nowhere is safe for them. Furthermore, the relationship between KPD and Knox County schools is problematic in other ways as well. During my tenure with KCS, I once observed a nonverbal special education student get left at school at the end of the day. This was likely due to a miscommunication, and because of socioeconomic barriers, the school staff could not get in contact with the student's caregivers. Knox County's solution was to partner with the SROs at Fulton and call in reinforcements from KPD to escort this student back home. So they stuck a black, nonverbal young adult in the back of a cop car alone and let KPD just leave school grounds with this student. To my knowledge, the student made it home okay, but where is the accountability? If the cop had done anything to that student or mistreated them in any way, the student wouldn't have been able to communicate that to anyone. If the student had had any sort of maladaptive behaviors, the cops were not trained to deal with that, and people, special education teachers, or anyone who was appropriately trained to deal with that was not present. Like, Knox County, do you not care about your students? These situations were handled completely poorly. That was a horrible policy and a horrible way to handle that situation. Just Knox County, that made me furious. Okay, Knox County schools must not begin any new MOA with KPD, KCSO, or any other police departments. Keep our students safe by investing new money in full-time mental health professionals for each school. Right now, the students at Austin East desperately need mental health care. Last year, so did the students at Farragut High School when several members of their student body lost their lives to mental illness and suicide. Those deaths could have been prevented if the students had access to mental health resources at their school. Cut the relationships with KPD and KCSO, invest in mental health resources and staff for students. Say his name.
Anthony Thompson Jr. Jennifer Kim.
Jennifer Kim, Knox County. I'm a mom of 3, and I'm a grandma to 1. And my granddaughter, although she's very young, she will attend Austin East someday because that's where she's zoned. The Austin East community has been begging, along with Black Lives Matter, to get police out of our schools. I'm glad to see we're finally here talking about it, but are you listening? It shouldn't have to take a student dying to get this discussion moving forward. And by the sound of it, some of you live such privileged lives that you're completely out of touch with how things impact other communities outside of your own. Police presence can affect the entire trajectory of a student's day and has been proven to have the most negative effects on students in underfunded neighborhoods. Austin East, the school where Anthony Thompson Jr. was murdered at the hands of police. When do we start listening to that community? What Farragut High School says about police presence in their schools is much different than what you'll find the students at Austin East or Fulton saying about police presence in theirs. We need to not continue making decisions based solely on the voices of those in the areas with money. This has been a serious problem for years that needs to stop right here, right now. For anyone with a pulse, it should be no secret about what happens when we continue to put police in our schools. Anthony Thompson Jr.'s family will have to live with that reality for the rest of their lives. Police killed Anthony. They invaded a place where it should have been very safe, and they murdered him. Police are not trained to counsel, and as Gordon mentioned, they do not de-escalate situations. They often act on emotion, and sometimes even kill children without justification, just as they did at Austin East to Anthony Thompson Jr. As you all know, this murder has profound effects on every student in that school and in the schools beyond. People in these communities, including students and teachers in underfunded areas, should be afforded the opportunity to speak and listen and discuss and be involved with school board members. Students and teachers shouldn't feel unheard simply going through the motions. Let's raise up their voices. Why haven't we been listening to all communities, along with groups like Black Lives Matters? Do you think the parents don't want their children protected? Or do you just think they're too stupid to be involved in the decision-making of their own children? Because that's the message you're sending. These communities have been suggesting alternatives to policing for many, many years, and they continue to be ignored time and time again. What's currently happening inside our schools at the hands of police is unnecessary student arrests, and as we heard here tonight, in many situations, extreme force. And of course, right here in Knoxville, Tennessee, the murder of Anthony Thompson Jr. So criminalization and the murdering of children is simply not the answer. We need better resources that will lift these children up and allow them the freedom to rise to their full potential. We need to empower them, not police them. But here we are in Knoxville, where just yesterday I witnessed the mayor quickly call the chief of police over and immediately arrest 2 Black activists who were a non-threat to anyone in the room or in the immediate area. In fact, they were introducing the grieving family of Anthony Thompson Jr., who had arrived at this public forum seeking answers regarding the death of their teenage loved one. As his father wept, police surrounded him and his family. Do you think that made him feel safe? I certainly don't. Is this overpowering police tactic the example we're going to continue on in Knoxville? This speak up and be silenced mentality, when's it going to stop? We're supposed to be raising the community up and listening to the voices of those affected. We don't need police, we need programs, we need resources, and we need to make positive changes together. When you start listening to all the voices, that's when we make progress. Until then, say his name.
Anthony Thompson Jr. Summer Awad.
Hello, my name is Summer Allwood. I'm a lifelong Knox County resident and an alumna of all Knox County, not all of them, but of Knox County schools throughout my K through 12 education. I want to first uplift the words of a friend, Brandy Augustus. She is a mother of Austin East students, and she was not able to be here today. And I want to uplift her voice as a Black mother with students at Austin East. And I think that's what we should be doing in all of these conversations, is uplifting those who are being directly impacted and harmed by these policies. You know, if Mr. Watson's house is on fire and my house is not on fire, we're going to go to Mr. Watson's house and we're going to say, what's going on? What do you need? Let's get you out of here. Let's figure out how we can get this fire put out. And so those are the voices that we need to be uplifting. And in any community kind of listening, you know, whatever process you all decide going forward, we need to be uplifting the voices who are being harmed by this and who are speaking out. And so I want to uplift Brandy's comments that she's calling for the removal of school resource officers from schools because she expresses, as we've all seen, that police, whatever training they have, they tend to lose that training whenever they're dealing with black people. It tends to kind of go out the window. We've seen that here in this very body, as the person prior to me spoke, when you have a multiracial coalition of activists protesting and the only ones that are arrested are black. And so we see right here in this body how KPD and KCSO officers are unequally applying the law. And so we can't trust those people to be in our schools and be treating all of our students equitably. As we've seen multiple times, white men can go into schools, into movie theaters with assault rifles, and they will be escorted out unharmed and even taken to Burger King, as we saw with Dylan Roof. We keep having to repeat this, but it's true. And so, as Brandy said, black people are perceived to not be able to be reasoned with, as was the case with Anthony Thompson Jr., and they're not given the presumption of benevolence. And so in that case, police are focused on eliminating what they perceive as a threat rather than preserving life. My mother, who's been a Knox County teacher for 20 plus years, described to me a school officer putting a second grader, a 7-year-old, on the ground and handcuffing that student, a black student. There should be no reason that a 7-year-old needs to be in handcuffs. And so, Brandy also uplifted the idea of having logical consequences. We have a police officer murder a child at school, and so we respond by putting in more school security and more burden on the students and blaming the students and criminalizing those students. And what we need to be doing is getting rid of the threat, which is the officers in the schools. And Brandy said it's like we're sending our babies off to the slaughter, and it's really awful to have to hear that from a Knox County parent. And so if we're talking about cultural competency, if we're talking about trauma-informed schools, your schools are neither culturally competent or trauma-informed unless they're considering the trauma that black and brown people experience at the hands of police. But I also, those are Brandy's comments, but I also want to comment on my own observations as a white woman onlooking the business of this meeting. I'm really glad that we're all kind of showing up to these meetings to see kind of the procedures and the ways that those procedures are utilized to kind of put forward and to thwart certain resolutions or policies. I was really appalled to hear Board Member Henderson talk about, well, I'd like to thank all of the officers because my students are safe.
Ma'am, if you can refrain from making comments about specific board members, please.
Okay. I just think it is really awful to say, if people, they talk about all lives matter. A statement like that does not say all lives matter. It says, at least my child was safe, but I don't care about Anthony Thompson Jr.'s family. So, and this brings me to, board members and just government entities like this, they tend to always say, well, I get what you're saying, but can you say it the way we want you to say it? Can you say it in the right tone? Can you say it at the right time? Can you not shout after people are speaking? Well, the thing is, when we come up to the podium, you all aren't listening, and you're giving us blank stares, and so we have to make our voices heard in other ways. And this is one of the ways that white supremacy operates, is it uses parliamentary procedure and other rules as a scapegoat to stall action and to thwart justice. And so when we see, you saying, well, I don't like that you put this in a resolution, I don't like subcommittees, this is all just kicking something down the road, using the rules of white supremacy to thwart justice and to thwart action, and it is cloaking indifference in the cloth of civility and telling us to be quiet in the language of telling us to be civil. And so, of course, as we end all of these, say his name.
Ashley Burns.
Hi, Ashley from Knox County. What a year to be on the board. Sorry about all that. It's been crazy this year. So I think all of us can agree, board and the community, that we would all love to see more access to mental health services, social workers, health services, and the like. I find this to be a very common theme among everybody that said anything, to include your discussion. And I appreciate that. People in our community are hurting. The pain is understandable, The pain has become anger, and like most anger, we take it out on the wrong people. We tend to take it out on people that don't actually deserve it. There are individuals and organizations that feel it's okay to take this anger out and act upon it, which does nothing to solve the matter, but does everything to continue to keep the perpetual cycle turning. And unfortunately, there are those that would not know how to even live their lives without this anger in it. The really unfortunate thing is that they then take those fears and anger and teach it to our children. This keeps the cycles moving for generations with no true way to get off the ride. I've heard a lot about accountability in the past few months, but even on that subject, we were asking for the wrong people to accept accountability. Instead, when do we begin to hold ourselves as individuals accountable and as a community accountable? When do we begin to show respect and love toward our neighbors? When do we begin to stop acting like bullies? When do we begin to break generational curses and figure out how to change our family trees and teach our children how to better themselves? I believe there needs to be discussion that has been brought up for the, I think it's the MOA. And I'm excited about that discussion. I'm excited about the fact that you're looking to the community and to leaders of different organizations to have input into that. And what I'm truly excited about is I'm hoping that whatever plan we come up with as a team, that other cities across this country can mirror what we've developed here in Knox County. I'm tired of people and individuals tearing apart our county and dividing us when all we want is the same thing. We want safety and security. We want opportunity for our children. We want a better world for our children than what we grew up in. That's everybody here, I believe. And I'm excited that Knox County can potentially become that city. You have one job, and that's just to keep the best interests of our children in mind. And I believe you're all very good at your job, and I'm sure that none of you has not heard a word that was said, right? None of you just ignored anything that was said tonight, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you standing strong for our children, teachers, and staff. My job as a parent is to teach my child how to respect their elders and those in a position of authority, to teach them right and wrong, and that there are consequences to their actions. My job as a member of the community is to be a part of a solution and not the problem, to reinforce those sound qualities taught by other parents, to better my community so that everyone can achieve their dreams and goals, to do my part uniting and not dividing it, and I accept this accountability. And I pray the rest of our community accepts that as well, and we look forward to working with the board to better our community as a whole. I pray that each of you are showered with God's blessings. Thank you.
Thank you. Rush nicely.
Hi, I'm Rush Nicely. I'm a parent of 2 elementary school students, and I'm very happy to be here. A while ago, I saw a video of a child be murdered in our schools. Sorry, emotional. When I saw that video, I knew we had to change. We had to change the way we operate and what we get away with. When I saw that video, I heard someone in authority tell us that nothing was wrong, that everything happened as it should have happened, that that student was completely to blame. My child could have been in that bathroom when multiple shots were fired. Doesn't matter from who. What matters is we should be trying to keep bullets from going off inside of our schools. My child could have been that trash can that got shot. My child could have been over in the corner. If he was left-handed, the bullet could have gone over in the other direction of the student that was on the ground in the video. I was mortified that that is what we allow and what we are considering good policing and acceptable in our school. I'm very happy that we are going to look at changing what happens inside of our schools. I don't want another child to be murdered. I don't want my children to be murdered. You don't want your children to be injured or murdered inside of the schools. This is very basic. And we need to change. Say his name.
Ethan Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Ethan Lindsay of Knox County, and I go to the L&M STEM Academy. I've been coming here for a couple of weeks, and I've said all I've been able to, so I'll try to make this quick. Now, we've been making progress in the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of months as a community in combating COVID-19 and the virus that causes it. And I'm so happy that we're finally starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel and that it's getting brighter every day. But right now, schools and the people that are within them are still at risk. And for that reason, I'm asking that we leave policy C-240 in place as the way it is to expire within August and possibly reconsider it then. And you have already taken a vote on it weeks ago. And there's no point in continuing to bring the matter up over and over again, because there are real issues that we need to address before we return to school next year. And mass just drowns those out instead of addressing real issues that our county is facing in so many different aspects and so many different ways that our students are not thriving because we're not addressing their issues and we're focusing on masks that we've already voted on, that we've already made decisions on. And yeah. But in terms of masks, I'm personally asking that they don't end on the 25th of May, because as someone who will be going to schools in the summer to help volunteer at Knox County schools camps and stuff, I want, for my safety, for the safety of the students that I'm working with, the teachers that I'm working with, I want people to wear masks because that's what's been keeping us safe for the last year. And until we do get access to vaccines for everyone, we saw some good news with them possibly releasing it 12 to 15-year-olds. But until that point, I do think we need to wear masks just to keep everyone safe. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to speak. Angel Jones.
Sorry. I'm Angel Jones of Knox County. I came to talk to you guys about a couple of things. The main thing being safety. And safety across the board is, I feel like it's been talked about a lot and involves many topics. For one, mask safety. Masks do help reduce the spread of droplets, which reduces the spread of COVID-19. This has been proven time and time again, and it is tiresome for it to continue to come up. Along with that, I have 2 kids in the Knox County school system. They were virtual the first semester. The second semester, I chose to put them back in person under the guarantee that there was going to be masks for the rest of the year, because I worry about not just their safety, but my safety, their teacher safety, parents, grandparents, everybody that they come in contact to. There are also new COVID strains coming out. There are new strands that are becoming more popular in other areas. This is an issue that we should not be continuously talking about. Masks do help reduce the spread of COVID. We have not had, I noticed that my kids did not have to go days or a week or so without school because of strep or the flu. More than likely because of masks are helping reduce the spread of the flu and strep, which would also mean they probably are also helping with COVID. So please, we don't need to be talking about releasing our mask policy or anything like that, because the policy works as it is. Our kids and our teachers and everybody else needs to wear masks, because I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it to help protect other people in case I come in contact with somebody who has COVID and I could be asymptomatic. I'm not wearing a mask just to protect myself. I don't have my kids wear masks just to protect themselves. I'm having them do it because my rights end where another person's rights begin, and everybody they should not be exposed to COVID unwarranted because somebody went to a bunch of church, and there's a lot of masks. A lot of churches I've been seeing aren't having masks or aren't separating. And what if they go to that church and pick up COVID and then go back to school the next day? Also, allergies are terrible right now. Who's going to be not wearing a mask soon, and all of a sudden, guess who sneezes is going to spread whatever else they have going on? It's just not a good idea. And then along with that, the next topic is safety, is whenever it comes to the, to the resolution that Daniel Watson has brought up and brought to light, along with Betty Satterfield. I think that is a great way to get community involvement and talking and moving along with what the community needs. Just because some people on this board might think that cops are great and might think that all their students are perfectly safe and happy, that's not true for everybody. That's not true for everybody at all. I've had to talk to my kids because their father is dead because he was shot by the police during a mental breakdown, because they were not trained to handle it. Anthony Thompson Jr. is dead because the police are not trained to handle that situation. So I'm coming for you as a parent, as a widow, as somebody who is in the military, as somebody who's a widow, a veteran, to tell you that you need to work with your communities. You need to listen to them. You need to talk to them. You need to... All these people here are trying to tell you something. They're trying to tell you that we have a resolution. We worked hard on this. It reads really well. And it's coming from the person who it also affects their district. And this is them saying, this is what my district needs. This is what we are supporting. And along with somebody else from a different district saying, this is something that we're supporting as well. So just because you might feel safe and cozy when all your privilege doesn't mean everybody else has that safety. Say his name.
Anthony Thompson Jr. Steve Burleson.
Thank you. Steve Burleson, Knoxville. This thing's a little cockeyed here, sorry. First off, I want to thank everybody that came out to speak today and they got to speak their words. I think we're going to become a stronger community by communicating. Council members, thank you very much for your time this evening. I know you're taking time away from your families, and that hopefully we can get done here and all go home and spend some time with our families. I want to talk a little bit about masks today. I know there's a lot of feelings around this, some pro, some con. What I would like to kind of stick to is the science behind it. And even though that we'll go over some of the science, that what their belief systems are plays a big role in whether or not, if it's for any reason, but we'll talk about masks, if they're going to stay masked or not. We can go over some science right now, but for most people, that's not going to change their minds on whether or not they want to continue wearing masks, because when the psychological portion of the brain will kind of anchor to its emotional attachment. But I just kind of want to go over some just scientific stuff. So when we're dealing with our kids, I want to look at this from a scientific perspective, not from an emotional perspective. And though I get the emotional side and I appreciate it, and I know that all the parents in here want the best not only for our kids but for our community, but we really got to stick to the science side of this argument or this discussion. I want to read a pretty decent study that was done by Stanford University Cardiology Division, Veterans Affairs. And so they did a very in-depth study. And what they did is they had their conclusion. I'm just going to read the conclusion here so we can kind of wrap this up really quick here. The conclusion was the existing scientific evidence challenges the safety and effectiveness of wearing masks as preventing COVID-19. The data suggests that both medical and non-medical face masks are ineffective in blocking human-to-human transmission of viral infectious diseases such as SARS, COVID-2 and COVID-19, thus supporting against the use of face masks. Wearing face masks has been demonstrated to have substantial adverse physiological and psychological effects. These include hypoxia, increased carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, shortness of breath, increased acidity, toxicity, elevation of fear and stress hormones, immune suppression, headaches, decline in cognitive performance, increased infection, chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. Long-term consequences of wearing a face mask goes into developing and progressing chronic diseases and premature death. Now, this is a Stanford study, and so this isn't a couple people coming together and just kind of have a conversation or having emotional feelings behind this. This is science. And what do we keep hearing? Follow the science. But we have a lot of people come up, and what they're doing is, myself even, I have an emotional attachment to this also. But what I need to stick to is what the science is telling us. And if the science is saying that wearing masks increases a whole host of health issues and has absolutely no health benefits, why are we doing it? Why would we make our kids or have our kids wear something that is being proven to cause adverse health effects and having no health benefits? Now, I'm sure a lot of us here would understand going through the end of this year wearing masks. I think, though I'd be happy to see them gone tomorrow, I would understand the school board going through the end of this year with masks. I think there is some simplicity and consistency with that. But based on the science, I think we should, as quickly as possible, remove masks from our kids and just from society in general. It does not change the spread of not only virus, but any type of bacterial infections. It just doesn't do that. And I wish it did. That would be great. But with the science and what it's saying, it just doesn't. So I appreciate your time this evening, and I hope you guys all have an amazing night.
Thank you very much. We appreciate all our public forum speakers tonight, and that concludes public forum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me, our meeting has not concluded. Thank you, Vice Chair. Do we have anything for public forum?
Heath is pulling something up for me, but I want to say that this Friday, Austin East students are hosting an anti-violence parade. It is student-led, and I would absolutely love for every community member in Knoxville to come out and support our students. Only staff and students will be permitted in the parade, but community members are allowed to line the Martin Luther King Jr. Street, and we will start from Austin East and go to Dr. Walter Hardy Park. And so that's this Friday, starting at 4:30 p.m. Heath is taking forever to pull up the flyer, but that's okay, because it'll be on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Anything else for board forum? Okay, Ms. Babb? I'm sorry. I'm looking at Ms. Bounds because her light is on.
Okay. I don't want to stir this all up again, but I do want to clarify something as a board member. I never promised that we would mask our kids for the entire year. Actually, I voted yes as part of the reopening plan with the understanding that that's why we had green, yellow, and red. So to my knowledge, there was never a promise that we would keep masks for the entire year. So had I known what this looked like, I might have voted differently, but I wanted our kids to get to go back to school in person. So I just keep getting emails and texts about the promise and the guarantee, and to my knowledge, there was never a promise and a guarantee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Babb?
Yes, I just want to once again tell our teachers how much I appreciate them, because it is Teacher Appreciation Week, which we keep forgetting about. But I do want to appreciate all of our teachers.
Yes, thank you so much. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to again thank everybody who came out and spoke at forum.
want to encourage all of you to continue to lift up your voices. And also want to give a shout out to our teachers and our educators. My wife is a teacher, and I've seen it firsthand. And if there was any year that our teachers needed to be applauded and celebrated, it is this year. So thank you.
Yes, you're here. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.